It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome into One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Ryan Gregware, joined by Michael Leegan. For headlines, it will be Sam Davis and all the baseball talk, as we are with you here from 11 to 2 a.m. on 90.7 FM, Facebook Live, and YouTube. And Mike, I say this every show I'm on, but this time I really do mean it. I've never looked forward to a show more. The topics that we're going to get into, it's so great. You know, I can pretend every show that I can't wait, but this one I really can't. So much baseball, some nice NBA, some good interviews. But first off, how are you doing, Mike? Because we're together for the next 3 hours. I think it's going to get pretentious. We just had a very, heated argument in the pre-production room, so it should be a great one. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing okay. First of all, like you, I'm super pumped for this show. I think this is the first show we've ever done together. I know, we obviously know each other beforehand, but so I was excited to get some counterbalance here. Mets, Yankees. It's going to be an exciting show, a lot to talk about. But for me personally, I'm a little mixed. In terms of just looking at the Mets trade deadline stuff, which is obviously what I'm most focused on right now. I can't deny I'm disappointed. And I don't think it's wrong to say that you're disappointed as a Met fan, because what they needed a bullpen arm, in my opinion. They needed a quality starter, especially with this DeGrom injury and Taijuan Walker underperforming, and they didn't get those guys. That being said, the Javi Baez move was a solid move. I'm not going to knock Javi. Would I prefer like a Trevor Story or a Chris Bryant? Sure. But, I'm sure the prospect package for those guys would have been higher. And this is what it is. So I'm not going to knock Javi. He's obviously got the relationship with Frankie, but we're going to get more into that later. I'm already going off on a tangent right now. All I can say is I'm a little mixed. I'm a little disappointed. So I'm going to get more into that. And as far as the Yankees, look, I think the Yankees had an amazing trade deadline. Honestly, I think they were probably one of the best performers at the deadline, one of the best buyers. And of course, we got other teams around the league making moves out in the NL West. Just so much to get into. I'm really looking forward to breaking it down with you, Ryan.
Yeah, you know how I can tell you're fired up is because I just asked how you're doing and you instantly go on a tangent about the Mets.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't help it. You asked me how I'm doing, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the Mets. And when you get me talking Mets, anyone who knows me knows this. I can't stop, especially with this season going on right now. There's just so much to break down.
Now, listen, I'm the same way with the Yankees. I can't separate my personal well-being from the Yankees. If one's doing bad, I am doing bad as well. And we will start with the Yankees. You mentioned a little bit their trade deadline. It was a really interesting one. Obviously it's been a disappointment this year, 3.5 out of a wild card, but Brian Cashman saw an opportunity to improve this team. All year we've been criticizing the balance in the lineup. They do so. They get Joey Gallo. They get Anthony Rizzo, 2 lefty bats, 2 that will provide some balance, much needed in this lineup. So we're going to start off with that and just what that move means going forward, and if it means the Yankees are real contenders here in the AL.
Yeah, look, this is what the Yankees have been looking for years now, in my opinion. When you think about Yankee Stadium, you think about the short porch in right field. It's all about having lefty power. And, for some reason, look, Cashman's brought in great guys over the years, but he has never really brought in that lefty bat, which they need. You got guys like Aaron Hicks in the lineup, sure. Tyler Wade, yeah, they're left-handed, but these aren't the guys. Ever since Didi left, they really haven't had that true left-handed power, the guy that's built for Yankee Stadium. And bringing in not only Joey Gallo, who was the guy they should have gone after, all the talk beforehand, he was the big name, but Anthony Rizzo, that came out of nowhere. I didn't see that coming. You're tapped into the Yankee scene. I don't know if you saw that coming, but I didn't. That was such a shocker to me. And to me, that was to get both those guys is just an amazing move for the Yankees. And look, I think the division's probably still out of play. I don't really see this team winning the East. That being said, the wild card's right there for the tanking. I know we're going to get more into that later. I'm sure you have your thoughts on the division, but you can't. Some were even saying that maybe the Yankees should have been sellers at the deadline. I've heard that from some people. And the fact that they went out, they bought, and they made smart moves and didn't give up a lot of big prospects. I think they had a great time. I think they had a great performance at the deadline.
Yeah, I refuse to ever entertain the idea of sellers. Absolutely refuse to. If anyone asked me if they were selling Aaron Judge, I'd leave him on red. I would just not answer. Ridiculous question. So, and as you said, that Rizzo move was a typical Cashman out of nowhere. We're not linked to him at all. It looked like he would go to the Red Sox. Perfect fit there. He doesn't. He goes to the Yankees. And Joey Gallo, as you mentioned, he is kind of a white whale for the Yankees. They've been in on him forever. His swing is just tailor-made for the short porch. It really is. Huge power bat for them. People talk about the strikeouts, low average, whatever. We'll get into all that, why that's nonsense and more. And then we'll go more broad MLB. Sam, he'll be with us for the first two segments. He'll lead us in the third for headlines. The trade deadline just outside of New York, I think, was really special. We hadn't seen one like this in years where you had so many guys on the move, so many teams buying. It's really refreshing to see. We've seen past deadlines where teams are in a wild card spot and they're selling. And this year is an opposite. You see teams where you can't really justify a playoff spot, like a Blue Jays or whatever, that buy. It was nice to see, the parity around the MLB. Obviously, the big trade, Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, two of the defending champs, the Dodgers, and so the rich get richer in that sense. But wild trade deadline overall, Mike. We're going to get more into that later.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember, and you just kind of alluded to it. I can't remember a time when the trade deadline was just so many moves. I mean, this is more like an NBA trade deadline. I mean, just these huge names moving at the midway point of the season. I just can't remember anything like this. I mean, obviously, you think about the Dodgers. I mean, that's the biggest one right there with Trey Turner and Max Scherzer going out to LA. It looked like for a second there that Scherzer would be going to the Padres, which would have been nuts. And now Dodgers is also crazy. I mean, Kershaw's out right now, but when he comes back, I mean, the two of them at the top. I mean, that's just insane. And then also you think about moves like, I mean, the Giants getting Chris Bryant. I mean, they kind of stood pat for a while, and then boom, right there is Chris Bryant for them. You think about, the A's bringing in Starling Marte, or even earlier in the week when you had like Nelson Cruz going to the Rays, and even talking about the Padres bringing in Adam Frazier, or the White Sox for Kimberly. I mean, there's just so much. Like, I don't think I could sit here probably for 2 minutes and just read you a list of all the names. And that would just take up 2 minutes of our entire show. I mean, obviously some names bigger than others, but as a fan, and it kind of stunk for me because I was at work all day and I'm like, I can't really look at my phone. And I'm like, oh man, I got to know what's going on. So like, I was missing so much, but as a fan, it was an amazing time just to be a baseball fan and see all these big names on the move. And, we'll see what kind of impact these guys have, because we could talk all you want about career numbers or what they've done so far this season. But at the end of the day, it's what are you going to do over these last 2 months or the playoffs, and how are you going to help your team? And that really is what defines these trades in the end.
Yeah, it's funny because every time you talk trade deadline, you're like, oh, I forgot about that deal. And that just happened with Nelson Cruz, who I just saw the Rays. The Yankees just played the Rays. I saw him, and I still forgot they traded for him. It was that crazy of a deadline. It was one of those things. You said you were at work. I was all locked into MLB Network yesterday. Shout out them. They did a great job bringing it down. But it was one of those things. I took out my trash, 5 minutes. I come back with 60 notifications. That was when the Yankees traded for Rizzo. It was one of those deadlines where you had to be completely tuned in, or you were not going to know what was going on. So wild stuff there. We'll get more into that. And then we have some interviews coming up. We have one with artist Marc Mellon, who sculpted the Handshake for the Century. Really nice, powerful piece with Jackie Robinson and George Trudeau. We get into all that, some other projects. We have another interview with Scott Coker. He's a really good guy, previewing the Bellator tonight and also picking his brain on what it's like to be the president of an MMA league, because it was really interesting to me because, seeing a guy like that, there's so much that goes into it, behind the scenes stuff we don't know. So we pick his brain there, get into all that. And then we'll end the show, Mike, with some NBA talk, because it's crazy, normal, right? It's kind of a dead time in sports, massive NBA trades, the NBA draft commence. Usually we'd be leading a show like that. That's our last segment of the day. Lakers trade for Russell Westbrook in a crazy move. The NBA draft the same night. Wild kind of period with the trade deadline and the draft going on at the same time. The Twitter timeline just going nuclear. Your thoughts on kind of the whole NBA draft and the Russell Westbrook trade to the Lakers?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's funny because, I mean, to me as a baseball guy, the baseball trades was the biggest story. But literally, it was like the NBA draft was an afterthought. It's like it didn't happen. Also, I think what was so weird was, and I'm sure you felt the same way, like because of COVID, it feels like we just had the draft, which we did. It was only just a few months ago. It wasn't a year ago like it normally is because of all the season schedule changes and all that. I mean, look, I think as far as the draft, I think, the Knicks brought in some solid pieces, and we're looking at it from a local standpoint, bringing in some guys that can help with defense and offensive gameplay. And we'll get more into that, later. Obviously, there'll be more like rotational guys, and you're not looking at big stars. We didn't have higher picks this year. And also the Nets made some moves, brought in 5 draft picks, which for a team that you're thinking about has got the big 3. a little interesting. And of course, Russ with the Lakers. Really going to be interested in breaking that down and seeing how, is Russ going to be able to vibe with LeBron? I mean, I think there was a lot of talk about him and AD at first, and that worked out. So who knows? But so much NBA to break down. We're really looking forward to that as well. And I think we're going to have a great show. Yeah,
it's funny. The NBA draft was one for the first time I can remember in a long time where I wasn't all the way locked in just because the Knicks finally had some success. It was, we had to wait even longer for their scheduled picks. We'll get into that. But yeah, the draft was kind of ruined for me because I'm going on Twitter looking at the trade deadline. I was watching the draft and I got every pick spoiled. There were 6 picks ahead of, what the TV was on. So we'll get into all that. But we are going to take a quick break here. We're going to get back with the Yankees. Sam will be joining us. It's going to be a great discussion. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back into One on One. Joining us now is Sam Davis, Mets beat reporter, but I hope for this segment, objective baseball fan. I really do hope so. Mets beat reporter, Red Sox fan. But before we get into that, I haven't had a chance to talk to you yet on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. I mean, you guys talked about it at the Open. I mean, it was an incredible trade deadline, even outside of course, the New York baseball teams. But I just was dying to get on this show and talk baseball. And of course, some big moves for both the Yankees and the Mets that I'm dying to get into as well.
Yeah, so we will start with the Yankees. And, I alluded to the moves that they made, but it was a really successful trade deadline in my eyes. At least from an addition standpoint, you certainly can't argue that. Whether you think they're the right moves is another story. But they didn't get Trevor Story. I just said Story. They got Joey Gallo instead, and it was a little bit of a back and forth between the two of them. And Joey Gallo was the major move they made. I think what's important about him, too, is he's under contract through not just this year, but next year. He's not just a rental. Like some of their other moves, he's a left-handed hitter, as we talked about. They didn't deal any of their top 12 prospects. We'll get more into it now. Sam, what were your thoughts on just overall the Joey Gallo deal, Anthony Rizzo as well, but starting off with just Joey Gallo to the New York Yankees?
Yeah, starting off strictly with Joey Gallo, I mean, at first, my first initial reaction was I think about him as a hitter, and I think about how he fits into kind of the mold of what a lot of these Yankees hitters have been this year, which is kind of the, whatever you want to call it, the true outcomes, whether that be a home run or a strikeout, not much in between. Joey Gallo is that, but then the more I start to think about this move, the more it makes sense to me. And I think the more it is definitely a good deal for the New York Yankees because of a couple things. The defense that Joey Gallo plays is a big part of this. He plays very good defense. He's not, most power hitters don't play very good defense and are sort of a liability in the outfield. Joey Gallo that's not the case with him. He's a good outfielder. He can play center field, which I think is huge for this team that definitely needs outfield help. And then also, I mean, they needed a left-handed bat. He's your guy. Like you kind of mentioned, Ryan, they didn't really give up too much to get there. They're going to have him under control, team control into next year as well. So that's another big part of it also. So when I take all of those factors in, it makes a lot more sense to me. But my first reaction, and I think it still has a little bit of validity. I mean, the strikeouts are certainly a concern. And I think with this Yankees lineup that has struggled all year, that's been one of the strike out. They're built for kind of those two outcomes. Joey Gallo fits that mold, which might necessarily not be the best thing, but he does get on base more than certainly the typical strikeout or home run hitter, so that helps as well. I think overall it's a really positive move, but there's part of me that can see this kind of backfiring on the New York Yankees and him just kind of fitting into the mold of what's been a really not great Yankees offense throughout the season.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, look, I agree with both of you guys. I think this was the move to make. I mean, we said it in the intro. This was the move that was talked about. This was the clear target, and they got him. I mean, look at the average. I mean, career 211 hitter. He's batting 225 in the season. I mean, that's not what's going to excite you. What's going to excite you is the power, the home runs, the OPS, the on base percentage. I mean, he's top 10 in the league in on base percentage. I mean, he strikes out a lot. I mean, that's going to happen. But look, he's got 25 home runs this season, 55 RBIs. That's what the Yankees are looking for an offense that was, pathetic at times, to be honest. Scoring one run, no runs. I mean, even the other night, 14-0, I think it was, against the Rays. I mean, obviously it's more recently, but going back early in the year, all those offensive struggles. I mean, this is the guy that you were looking for. And then Sam, you're talking about that the defensive versatility. I don't know. I mean, he's played every outfield position, so of course he can play center. I don't know if you would rather have Judge in center or him in center. Not really sure. I mean, you got Stanton back now.
I mean, just not Brett Gardner. You just can't.
Just not Brett Gardner. Yeah. That's the main thing. I mean, for Yankee fans, I'm sure they're all pretty tired of him. I mean, Brian Cashman isn't. That's why he keeps coming back on those one-year deals. But anyway, I think this is just a great move overall. Between getting that other, he's also a great defender. I mean, we can't even. Not only can he play the positions, but he can get some putouts. He can cover the field. I mean, he's a very good defensive player as well. Overall, I just think it's a great move. I can't wait to see him at Yankee Stadium. I mean, look, I'm never going to root for the Yankees. I'm not a Yankee fan. That being said, to see, I'll be interested to see what he can do in Yankee Stadium with that short porch. And then also, you guys also mentioned it. Not giving up a lot of prospects. That's what I got to give Cashman credit, and we'll get more into the performance of a guy like Zach Scott later. But to have the wherewithal to know, like, I can get guys without having to give up my top prospects. I mean, that's of course very impressive. And then also, just a little bit. Who knows what he's really going to do? I don't really think he's going to do a lot. Boone kind of talked about it in a press conference where it's like we see him as a specialist. I mean, he has his slider. He's a left-handed specialist, it seems like. And one of the sliders seems to be one of his stronger pitches. And, lefties are batting 176 against him. So, I mean, that's where we're really going to see him. But my thing is, like, with the 3-batter rule, how much do specialists really play in the game? So I don't really know how much he's really going to contribute. But obviously, the crux of the deal was Gallo. And I'm not going to knock this deal. I think it was a great move. I said it off the top. You guys both said it. And, I think it's a great move for the Yankees.
Yeah, a lot to get into this move. And Sam mentioned the true outcomes, strikeouts, homers. There's a third true outcome that's brought up in that conversation. It's walks. And he has the best walk rate in the MLB. That's a huge part of it. The people who bring up the 211 average, especially Yankee fans, they don't want to be happy because average is not a factor in today's game like it once was. Teams that are, down in the league in average, like the Brewers are 29th in average. They are running away with their division. The reason that the Yankees aren't winning games isn't strikeouts either. The Rays lead the MLB by a large margin. The Giants and Dodgers are both ahead of them. It's because of the double plays. They lead the league in double plays. They have 100 on the year. It's absolutely brutal watching the rally killers and all that. People don't want to hear this, but strikeouts are better than double plays. I'd rather a guy strike out. The Yankees would also then ground into a double play. He has 9 career double plays grounded to. So he lifts the ball. I think that's huge. Even just this year, Gio Urshela, DJ LeMahieu, and Aaron Judge have all grounded into 9+. Gallo's played almost every game this year, 9 career. So I think that's the huge thing. The other thing is runners in scoring position. People will bring up the average all they want, but he has a 905 OPS with runners in scoring position. That's best on the Yankees right now, and that's this season. So I think when you look at it like that, you have to just disregard the average, disregard the strikeouts. It doesn't matter in today's game. You talk about the fielding too. He's the only player in baseball top 10 in homers and defensive runs saved. He's an elite defender in right. He'll go into left. You mentioned center field. He's played, I think, 55 career games in center. You talk about that conversation. You'd probably rather an Aaron Judge in center just because, we saw it last night in Miami. It's interesting that this is the first series that they're together because it's in an NL ballpark. So you're throwing Stanton in left field. That's the only way you're going to get into the lineup. And I think that's good. It shows what this lineup can be, because we'll get into Rizzo now because, Luke Voit is a guy they kept. And obviously him and Rizzo play the same position. If Stan can play left field, you can throw Luke Voit at DH. You can do a lot of different things. You can put Judge or Gallo in center. And suddenly you're looking at a 1 through 9 juggernaut. It's one of the best lineups in baseball. You'd have no free outs. And it's such a refreshing sight from seeing a Brett Gardner, who you mentioned, Brian Cashman has a affinity with him. He's a career Yankee, which I think is wild when you look at the other career Yankees. Some guys that weren't career Yankees, but Brett Gardner's the guy who made it out. It's absolutely crazy to look at. But yeah, he can't be playing on this team anymore. And you look at it from a prospect perspective, Cashman went with trading depth over top heavy. I love that move, because what guys are going to, turn out more often than not? The guys at the top of your farm system. He traded from an area of surplus. They had a ton of, mid-tier prospects. That's what they did. They packaged 4 of them to get Gallo, Ana Rodriguez, who you mentioned, 64, ground ball rate. So that's certainly encouraging. Good peripherals there. But now let's shift to Anthony Rizzo. And this move, for the strikeout people who harp on all that, this one makes you happy, because he is 23rd lowest among qualified hitters in strikeout rate, 15.7. He's really cut down on it a few years ago. He was striking out a bunch. He's kind of choked up on the bat, got onto the plate, and he turns on those inside pitches. So, the Yankees are bottom 5 in first baseman OPS. We know Luke Voit's only played 30 games. Anthony Rizzo, a huge addition. We saw that first game in Miami yesterday, going 2 for 3 with the homer. His presence was felt immediately. Sam, I'll start with you. Do you see an Anthony Rizzo being, that spark plug, that juggernaut? He knows how to win too, winning in Chicago. Is this a move? It really came out of nowhere. I don't know if you wanted your Red Sox to get him or not, but he was certainly linked to them. Is Anthony Rizzo to the Yankees one that you see being a successful one?
Yeah, I mean, this was a great move for the New York Yankees. And like you said, it came as a big shock for me. I totally expected the Boston Red Sox to get him. It just seemed like the narrative fit that perfectly. The fact that he grew up, in the Red Sox system. First of all, before I get into what a player he is on the field, off the field, he's an incredible guy. And it pains me that he went to the New York Yankees, because I like to root against the New York Yankees. There's kind of no secret there. And it's hard to root against a guy like Anthony Rizzo. He's just the class act. You could tell how much Chicago Cubs fans and coaches and other players love him. So that's tough for the Cubs to lose. But in terms of on the field, what you're getting for Anthony Rizzo, he, like you said, it certainly kind of balances out that Joey Gallo move, because he doesn't strike out as much, puts the ball in play a lot more. He's great defensively at first base, which helps as well. Voigt's been hurt most of the year, so that's certainly a position the Yankees felt they needed to address, because they don't know the health of Voit going forward. They don't know. That's certainly a question mark. That is why they went out and got Anthony Rizzo, I believe. And it's just a great move, because I think that's why I look at this Joey Gallo move a lot more optimistically, because they balance that out with a guy like Anthony Rizzo, a guy that gets on base, doesn't strike out as much, will certainly help the team defensively as well. And I don't know, I think one other part of this move that you mentioned that we kind of have to get into as well is what's going to happen with Luke Voit once he returns. I mean, that's certainly the question mark, because that's the only, I guess, negative I can think of with this trade, because Anthony Rizzo being at first place, you assume he's going to start every single day. That pushes either Stanton as a DH and then Voigt's out of the lineup, which right now Voigt's hurt, so that's fine. But once Voit does return, Stanton might move to the outfield, which, I mean, is a little bit of a question mark. He's certainly not the best defensive outfielder. He's not the worst, but he hasn't played there in a while either. So that's kind of concerning, I guess you could say. And then I guess Voit becomes the DH. I think the Yankees really could have turned this into, and they tried to use Voit as kind of trade bait to pick up a pitcher, which I think would have really just put this Yankees deadline to completely an A+, if they were to kind of find maybe a starter in there. Maybe they didn't want to give up enough prospects to get it. Maybe Voit wasn't enough for another team, especially due to his injuries. But I think that's something they could have done, because now I guess it's kind of a good problem to have, because you have one too many players for these spots. But I'm not sure what's going to happen with Luke Voit. I mean, Anthony Rizzo is your everyday starting first baseman. And I think Cashman and Aaron Boone want Giancarlo Stanton in the lineup every single day, or just about every day. So he might have to play in the outfield, which leaves Voit kind of, I guess, in that DH position for the time being. But I think that's my one knock of this. I guess not really a knock, but I guess the one thing I can say negatively about this trade is that who knows what's going to happen with that Voit situation. I think it would have been really impressive if they were able to turn Voit into a starting pitcher, because that is the one clear kind of still weakness of this team, even though they've performed well all year. And don't get me wrong, they certainly have. But to expect Domingo Germán to continue to step up and pitch really well, to expect Kluber and Severino to return healthy, it's kind of a lot to ask, I think. If you're a team that's making a run at the playoffs, which the Yankees obviously are trying to do, I think going out and getting a starting pitcher would have really been just like the I guess just really set this deadline apart for the New York Yankees and really boost their chances to make the playoffs. But right now, I mean, you can't complain about Anthony Rizzo. To get back to your point, I mean, you can't complain about him. He's great for this team, both defensively, and then also he's going to provide a little more consistency and stability offensively as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, you guys kind of touched on all of it. I don't really know how much more I can add. I mean, look, Anthony Rizzo is an A+ offensive player. He's an A+ defensive player. Once again, just like Joey Gallo, you're getting a guy that's going to hit. He's going to feel well. I mean, he's a 4-time Gold Glove winner. Anthony Rizzo is. So, I mean, look, Luke Voit was fine at first base, but that's even, better, obviously, especially when you got guys like Gleyber Torres playing short that are going to throw it all over the place. It's nice to have a guy like Rizzo at first base who's going to help you out. That being said, also, when you think about Luke Voit, Sam, I totally agree. That's the one thing I wish the Yankees would have done. It would have made sense for them would to be a trade Luke Voit for pitching. Obviously, with the deadline, they're right up against it. Also, Voit is hurt. He's underperformed this year. How much of a starter is that really going to get you? You probably have to give up some more prospects, somebody else. So you understand why it didn't happen. And the key thing is, and you guys both mentioned it as well, if Voit can come back healthy and he can be in the lineup, the key is you got to get Stanton in the outfield. You've heard Boone say, we don't want Stanton to run around too much. We don't want to hurt his legs. Like, he's got to jog out there. He's got to stand in the outfield for 3 outs sometimes and then jog back in. Like, that shouldn't be an issue. Like, he's not always going to be sprinting around like he's a soccer player out there. Like, it's a lot of times just running in a straight line. Like, I don't really think it's that big of a deal to ask a guy who's a top athlete to play left field or right field or wherever we want to put him. So that being said, so I think you got to get Stanton in the outfield, and then you can put Voit at DH. I mean, obviously, you're still hurt in terms of flexibility with Sanchez. I mean, you like to see him DH sometimes, obviously with Higashioka and Cole's relationship. I mean, look, but you're never going to complain about having too many great bats, too many power bats. And the big thing, and we've all said it, is balance. For the first time, the Yankees with Gallo and Rizzo, because also I think just one lefty wasn't enough, Gallo and Rizzo, because let's say it, I already said at the top, a guy like Tyler Wade or, Rougned Odor, they're good left-handed hitters, but they're not the guys that are going to balance your lineup. So to get in, not only Gallo, to get in Rizzo, we've all said it, just the balance is fantastic. But when we're talking about these acquisitions and, and we're thinking about where the Yankees going to go, I mean, something that comes up for me is, look, it's great to have Rizzo. It's great to have, Joey Gallo. They also brought in Andrew Heaney, who's like going to be a nice depth rotation starting piece. I mean, he's kind of like break glass in case of emergency. I don't really see him getting in the rotation right away. I mean, you still have Germán, Montgomery, Tyone, Cole, obviously. I think Nestor Cortez has done great. I wouldn't put Heaney above any of them. But the point that I'm going to make is that this team is only going to go as far as the stars that were already here. So these pieces they got are great, especially Gallo. I think if I'm going to pick one of the two, I think it's the bigger one. But look, this team will not make the wild card, will not win the division unless DJ LeMahieu is the DJ LeMahieu of old. I mean, I said that on a show a couple weeks ago. For the Yankees to make the playoffs, he's got to be who he is. They are who we thought they were, in the infamous words of one famous NFL coach. But getting back to the point, you need LeMahieu to perform. You need Torres to perform. I mean, let's be honest. I think he's been kind of having a disappointing year. You need Judge to be healthy and performing. You need Stanton to get out of this funk and stop striking out so much. It's great to bring in guys, but you can only perform as well as the core that is already in place. And if you're a Yankee fan, that's what you have to look at. And to me, this also all goes back to Boone. How is Boone going to manage this lineup, and how is he going to ensure that the guys who are already here are able to perform, turn things around, and how are the guys coming in going to be able to fit in nicely and add to the lineup that exists? And of course, also, it's about Cole. At the end of the day, the starting rotation, the success of the team, pitching is key in the playoffs. And, Garrett Cole, look, I said it before, the 14-0 loss to the Rays, he gave up 7 earned runs. That's not acceptable for the guy who's supposed to be, if not the best pitcher in the American League, one of the best pitchers in baseball. I mean, it's just not acceptable for that to happen. So obviously he's been hurt by the sticky stuff a little bit, but he's got to perform like an ace. The players that were already here got to perform like the stars they can be. And look, if that all happens, the Yankees can be a wild card team, maybe division winner. I don't think so, but those are just my 2 cents on the whole Yankee situation right now.
Yeah, a lot to go through with you guys said, but one thing Sam said, it made me smile on the inside because he's a Red Sox fan. He doesn't like the Yankees. His one negative was that they have too many good players for a position. No, paraphrasing a little bit.
Yeah, you are. You're putting words in my mouth a little bit. But
bit. But that issue is a problem, and it is a great problem to have. The Luke Voit stuff, listen, he's put his heart and soul into the Yankees. He's a gamer. I love Luke Voit. I really do. It would have crushed me to see that tribute video come. I see the Cubs fans there. They're just their souls. We'll get more into them later, but their souls are getting crushed looking at these, tribute videos on Twitter. I couldn't have taken the Luke Voit one. He's been everything. He led the league in homers last year. So I get why Cashman, who smartly was looking to trade him, didn't do so. If the assets weren't there, you're not going to force a trade for Luke Voit, who you have in the contract for 2+ years when you only have Rizzo for 2 months, right? It would have been detrimental to just flip Voit for whatever pitching help you can get. No, you got to hold your ground. You can't give him all the leverage. That's one thing, Cashman. You always got to give him credit. He's always going to have the leverage. He's never going to, get embarrassed out there in a trade. And so I'm really glad that they kept Voit in that sense. It's going to come down to Stanton, though. You guys are right. He's going to have to play the field. He's going to have to suck it up. If you look at Stanton, he's one of the 5 best athletes in the game. Looking at him, he's huge. Everything. There is zero reason he can't play the field. The fact that it's taken 4 months to build him up to play 2 games in Miami in the field, it's ridiculous in his own sense. And so the Gallo trade really forces that issue because to get the most optimal lineup, he only needed to be there. But Mike said a really good point, which I don't know if everyone is on board with, but I 100% am. It's going to come down to the guys that were already here. Gallo and Rizzo will make their lives way easier. That is for sure. But there's no reason they should be in this position, where they're 3.5 out of the wild card. And it's because of the guys that were here. Gallo and Rizzo aren't going to be able to just flip the switch and turn your season completely around. You're going to need a Gleyber Torres to snap out of it and become at least a league average hitter, which he hasn't been. DJ LeMahieu grossly underperformed, batting average down 70 points from last year. You're going to need him to step it up. That's what it's going to come down to. It's not going to be just the Gallos and Rizzos. And I hope most Yankee fans see that because I don't know if that's the case. I think people expect, Rizzo and Gallo, like Rizzo yesterday. The offense wasn't great. Rizzo hit a home run. He scored a second run. They don't win that game without him. That's for sure. But you don't win that game if Fernando doesn't get a huge hit. Jameson Taillon, who I think really deserves some credit here, 1.16 July ERA. He needed to step up. He's been absolutely phenomenal. He needs to get his credit right now. I think you take him right after Cole in that rotation. You really do. Jordan Montgomery, really solid ERA under 4. Domingo Germán, he's up and down. He just had 7 no-hit innings. There's a great Red Sox lineup. We know what happened later in that game. You don't need to remind me, Sam. But, the rotation does have potential. And their ERA is 5th, I think, right now in the AL. And certainly if you looked at either of the last 4 years, you would have taken that. I don't think it was that high in any of them. The offense had carried them. But this year it's been the pitching. I think the pitching can stay the way it is, and they will be able to get into the playoffs as long as the lineup turns around. And you look at the schedule coming up, and we'll just end with this because it is really interesting. Their next now 12 games after taking the first against the Marlins are 2 against the Marlins, 3 versus the Orioles, 4 versus the Mariners at home. That's a huge series. The Mariners are a game up on them in the standings, and then 3 versus the Royals. So those 4 teams are not world beaters. I know the Mariners are a game above, but they have a -50 run differential. I don't think anyone's too worried about them. They just traded their closer. Whatever. We'll get into all that. But those 4 teams are not world beaters. You have to do some damage there. I would say 9-4, worst case scenario. They took the first game yesterday, so now 8-4. I think you have to come out of this hot. You have to feel good. Get to 10 games over 500. It's a very nice, area to be in. And listen, the division, we could talk about it. I'm saying it's still in play because the Rays and Red Sox play 6 of the next 12, so they are going to beat up on each other. If the Yankees do go 9-4 and they do beat up on each other, they'll be sitting 4.5 out of a division. It's just a reality situation. Not saying they're going to win it. If you force my hand right now, Alex did yesterday, actually. We had this conversation. He point blank, he asked me, will they win this division? I still said no. but it's not crazy out of it. 7.5 right now, could get to 6.5 by the end of the day. So, we certainly look at it there. It's not completely out of it. But yeah, I think when you look at the Yankees, it's promising. But the wild card, I think we'll end it with here. I'll ask both you guys that. Do you think right now that, they would be the favorites? I know it's weird because they're 3.5 out. The A's improved also, but do you see these moves kind of being the ones that give them that boost and to get them into that wild card game?
Yeah, I would say.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Right, yeah, I would just say that. Look, I think the A's are a lock for one of the 2 wild card spots. It just seems like Oakland is always one of those guys, one of those teams, that's always kind of just there in the mix. Getting Starling Marte, batting 305 on the year, solid player, former All-Star. They also brought in Andrew Chafin from the Cubs, a great reliever, and then you already get guys on the team like Matt Olson. You got a third baseman in Matt Chapman. This is a very solid team. Obviously the A's they're the classic case of great regular season, poor in the playoffs, but the point is making it to the playoffs, and the A's always seem to do that. So I'm going to say they're pretty much a lock for one of the wild card. I know it's a little early, but I think they are. In terms of the Yankees, though, and the Mariners, I think that's where the Yankees are really going to play for that second spot. The Mariners had a really weird trade deadline, trading away one of their top relievers and then bringing in some other guys. And it was really strange for a team that's contending. We're getting rid of Kendall Graveman and just all. It's just very strange. With that being said, look, before the trade deadline and before the All-Star break, my thought was the Yankees were not going to make the playoffs because I didn't really think they were going to make these big moves. They did. So now I'm going to have to kind of amend my opinion personally. That being said, I think the A's are going to be the first wild card, and it pains me to say this, but with these moves and, I think the energy it's going to bring, I do, and I just don't really trust Seattle because I think it's a very poorly run organization. I see the Yankees grabbing that second wild card spot.
I don't know if I can go that far right now, just because you gotta think of a couple things here. A couple good points you guys brought up. Mike, you brought it up first, and Ryan, you talked about it as well. The players that are currently on the Yankees and have been with the Yankees the whole year, we've talked about it week in and week out on our baseball podcast, on one-on-one. They need to perform better. They look like they should perform better, especially the lineup, and they haven't. And they can. And we're 100 games into the season, if not more, at this moment. And they still haven't. So how am I going to believe that DJ LeMahieu is going to turn things around? Gleyber Torres is going to turn things around. And all of a sudden, just because Anthony Rizzo and Joey Gallo are in the same lineup, they're going to start to be the hitters that they should be or have been in the past. I can't confirm that. I can't really be truly confident in that. And then you add that to the fact that they didn't add to the starting rotation. I know the starting rotation's been good all year, but they've overachieved. Everyone can say that. I think Taillon has been unbelievable right now. He's overachieved. Corey Kluber, before he was hurt, he was overachieving. Now he's hurt. Severino, you're not sure what you're going to get from him. And then Cole has been up and down slightly, although I don't expect him to be anything less than an ace of that staff. But without all that being said, you look at what some of these other teams did, the Oakland A's, that Starling Marte move is really good. I think that really helps them out a lot. You're right, Mike. They win tons of games in the regular season. Say what you want about the playoffs, but they win a lot of games in the regular season. That's what they do. So you put a lot of trust in them. And then you've got, sure, the Rays and the Red Sox did not add too much. You got Nelson Cruz and Kyle Schwarber was their kind of big moves, which isn't huge. But they're good teams, and they've gone this whole way, 100 games plus, playing very, very good baseball with the guys that are currently in their clubhouse and have been with them for the whole season. So for me, those teams aren't going to go anywhere. One of them will win the division. The other I could see is easily making a wild card. And then sure, the Yankees can overcome the Seattle Mariners because they're just, their deadline moves were certainly questionable. But for me, they still have to catch either the Oakland A's or, of course, the Rays or Red Sox, depending on who doesn't win the AL East. And to me, that is a really tall task just because you're relying on guys that haven't performed all season to perform better just because they had 2 additions. Seems like a lot.
Yeah, just to wrap up here, we know what I think about the Yankees. We know I think they will get a wild card, but they're not going to be able to do so. They're not going to get help from the A's. I think that's a point you guys both made. The A's will win the games. The Yankees just have to do that more. They have a 3-game series against each other, the end of August, which I think we could, I don't want to foreshadow too much. That could be the one that makes or breaks both their seasons. I know Alex said that to me yesterday. It's going to be a huge series, but I think that'll wrap up the Yankees talk. But for the baseball talk, we're just getting started, really. We're going to talk Mets after this break, and it's going to be interesting. Fireworks will fly. I can promise you that. We had some heated discussions in the pre-show, so make sure to stay on the other side of the break. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
One on One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
We're back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, and back with the Mets, who had an up and down trade deadline to say the league's very interesting. At first, it looked like they were getting Chris Bryant, ton of different stuff. Then it looked they were getting no one. Panic set in. They end up settling, and I will stick with settling for Javi Baez. I know some people may disagree. I believe that is a settle. They got Javi Baez, who is not Chris Bryant. But let's just start off with initial thoughts. Michael, I'll start with you. Being the Mets fan here, what were your thoughts on Zach Scott's first deadline with the Mets? What were your thoughts on what they did? Is it enough? Your initial thoughts on the deadline?
Yeah, I am really mixed and conflicted about this whole deadline performance. I mean, my initial reaction was disappointment, and then it kind of turned to, okay, this is all right, I can live with this. And then I got the DeGrom news, so I went back to disappointment, and I'm going to settle on that feeling. I can't deny that I'm disappointed, and I'll kind of lay out why. First, I'll start off with Baez. I'm not going to knock the Baez move. I think it makes sense for the team overall. Lindor is going to be out until the end of August, early September. You can't have Jonathan Villar, as much as he's been a decent player, Luis Guillorme playing short every day. They just don't hit enough, in my opinion. They're best served as bench players. So you needed a quality shortstop for that period of time. So when you looked at that, I really think that kind of you're looking at Baez or Story on the market. And obviously I think Story was probably going to cost some more because I think he's probably the better player personally. At least in my opinion, I think he is, or at least has performed better over the last few years or so. So that's probably what shied the Mets away from Story. And then I guess that kind of leaves you with Baez. I mean, there was talk of Chris Bryant. Obviously, you mentioned it, Ryan. And I mean, the Mets have been linked to Chris Bryant basically since the offseason. I mean, it seems the Mets management hates J.D. Davis. Now, look, I'm not a fan of J.D. Davis's defense either. So I had no problem with them trying to upgrade third. But then when you think about the fact that, sure, you can get Chris Bryant and he can play third base for you, but you still have a hole at shortstop. He's not going to play short for you, just like Josh Donaldson. I know that was one of the names out there too. Can't play short for you either. So when you factor in all of those things, and then you think about how Baez is a very solid bat as well. Look, he strikes out a ton. I mean, that's, frustrating, but that's also today's game. I mean, 3 true outcomes, players strike out a lot, launch angle, all that. Look, he's going to be a very solid defender. He can play short. And then when Lindor comes back, he can move over to second, which is probably where he's going to go. And of course, the two of them played together on the Puerto Rican national team for the World Baseball Classic. They have a great relationship. They already showed they can be a great double play combination. The move makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. They have it. And, apparently he is a high energy guy. And apparently he's a good locker room guy as well. Whether or not you want to get on him for that whole Amir Garrett antics thing. I mean, part of me thought it was kind of funny and cool. Part of me thought it was really stupid. That being being said. So I'm not going to knock the Baez move. It's solid. Looking forward to his debut. I think he's going to be hopefully a decent piece. I'm not expecting Cespedes level performance. I'm not going to knock that, but I am going to knock, and this is what really frustrated me about this deadline, performance, is the lack of adding a true starter and a bullpen arm. You cannot sit here as a logical, objective not Mets fan, just baseball fan, and tell me that the Mets didn't need another bullpen arm and didn't need another starter. That we found out on Friday after the trade deadline that DeGrom had right forearm inflammation, and was going to be out. At least he's not coming back till September. So there is no way. And I didn't really hear. I know Sam's our Mets beat reporter. He can tell me what they said. I'm sorry. I don't care what they told the media. There is no way that the Mets didn't know that DeGrom. Actually, now that I'm remembering this, they said that it was too late for them to make a move. But the point is, they should have been proactive instead of reactive. They should have known that, hey, we're not sure about DeGrom, and also Taiwan has struggled. Stroman's been up and down as of late. I know he was great against Cincinnati. Rich Hill's on the older side. Peterson's hurt. They knew they needed a starter. I'm not saying you have to go out there and get Max Scherzer. I mean, he was never coming here because the Nationals wouldn't trade him and he didn't want to come. But there's no reason. I mean, the Phillies got Kyle Gibson. Kyle Gibson was the guy that I was interested in. I don't really think they gave up a crazy amount for him. I mean, I know the Mets were saying they were getting laughable offers, but I don't understand why they couldn't really go after Kyle Gibson or just like a John Gray or something. I think that there was a potential. I'm not asking for an ace. I'm just asking for someone who's okay. What's up, Sam?
Davies too from the Cubs. It's another
Davies too, exactly. Yeah. I know I'm kind of going on a rant, but I have so much to say, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me. And then the fact that they got a pitcher, and like you were saying, Sam, with Davies, I saw a tweet earlier, and it was like the Mets kind of viewed Davies and Williams as equals, and what drew them to Williams was the option to send him to the minor leagues, which is just ridiculous. Davies is the better pitcher. Who cares if you can send someone to the minor leagues? Get the better pitcher. I mean, maybe the package would have been different for that. I don't know. But the most frustrating thing, which really annoys me more than anything else, is the fact they didn't get another reliever. I know Kimbrel, the Cubs, I mean, not the Cubs, excuse me, the White Sox gave up a decent amount to get him. So maybe that was prohibitive. But no one can sit here and tell me that they trust Edwin Diaz night in, night out, that they trust Edwin Diaz in a playoff game. I mean, Edwin Diaz, look, I'm sure he's a nice person. When he's on, he's a great pitcher. That being said, he is not the mentally toughest person. Now, I'm not going to knock someone for not being mentally tough. You never knock someone for their mental health or anything like that. That's not acceptable whatsoever. But that being said, it's about wins and losses in baseball. And I just don't trust Edwin Diaz. I don't trust him to perform in a playoff game. And I really find it hard to believe that Zach and Sandy did too. And I'm not saying maybe Kimber was too prohibitive, but it doesn't make sense to me why you didn't go out and add another bullpen arm for the sake of Diaz alone, but also for the fact that Drew Smith has underperformed recently. The fact that, Castro, ever since the sticky stuff ban, has been up and down. The fact that May is inconsistent. Lugo hasn't been who he is. I just, if I'm going to sum it all up, Baez, I'm okay with, but I'm very frustrated in the lack of a solid starter and a bullpen arm, particularly a closer, who I know is hard to find. I know that was a lot to say. I had a lot to get off my chest. So the two of you, I would love to hear what one of you had to say. Sam, you're a beat reporter. Why don't we hear that?
Yeah, well, first I'll start with Baez, which also at first I was disappointed, kind of like you, if I'm going to be honest. Right off the jump, I heard the news and I was thinking Chris Bryant, just because you said third base, but he's got versatility. He can play the outfield as well. Conforto has been terrible this year. There's no mistaking that. So put Chris Bryant in the outfield, and then Conforto doesn't have to start barely at all. And then you can leave JD Davis at third base or whatever. Maybe you put Bryant. It allows for a lot more flexibility for Rojas. That's what I did like about them looking at Bryant. Then they go to Baez, and it was shock at first, but the more I looked at it, the more it kind of made sense to me. First of all, he fills in at shortstop right now, which I think is definitely very helpful. And then in addition to that, once Lindor comes back, like you kind of said, he can switch over to second base. They have a great kind of double play duo. He could also play third base. He said he was willing to play all over the diamond, which I think you have to kind of keep McNeil in the lineup with the way he's hitting right now. So you could leave McNeil at second, put Baez at third base, and that kind of leaves JD Davis as the odd man out, unfortunately for him. But and then also, I mean, I hate to bring it up, but he really did want to come to the Mets, and the Mets seemed like they really wanted him. And they say what you want about the chemistry, which I know, Mike, you hate to hear that word, but listen, this was a big deal for the front office. This was a very big deal for them. They needed a guy that they thought could fit in perfectly with this Mets team, and kind of that's what Javi Baez is. I think he's really going to gel really well with the clubhouse. Rojas and Lindor and the rest of the team is really going to love him, I think. And he really wants to play in New York. He's fit for kind of that, the market that New York brings. So add that all in. And then also he's a great defender and he's going to hit a lot of home runs. Yes, he does strike out a lot. Doesn't get on base. His on-base percentage is pretty low. But other than, I guess, those two things, overall, I do like the move for Baez. But I'm with you, Mike. I think the starting pitching is the biggest concern right now because you mentioned they did know about DeGrom before the deadline. And that blows my mind. That honestly blows my mind. The fact that Zach Scott knew Jacob DeGrom was not going to pitch until September prior to the deadline, prior to the fact that, like you meant, like Ian Kennedy and Kyle Gibson to the Phillies. That happened after they knew about Jacob DeGrom. Those are two guys they could have went out and got. Ian Kennedy is a guy they could have got for probably not very much. I think Kyle Gibson would have costed a little more, but Ian Kennedy is a guy that's started but also been in the bullpen, a guy that can kind of do both for this Mets team as they're kind of in limbo with their starters, especially DeGrom. No, he's not Jacob. And the reasoning for Scott was nobody could be Jacob DeGrom. Well, Jacob DeGrom is going to be Jacob DeGrom when he's back. They're not asking for a Jacob DeGrom 2.0. They're asking for a pitcher that can step in and eat up innings and just be an arm right now. Because there's a ton of pressure on this starting rotation between Carrasco, who's just coming back from injury. He's going to have to get ramped up. He's going to have to pitch a lot of innings. Taijuan Walker has pitched the most innings since before his Tommy John surgery, and he's been not very good lately. That's a concern. Stroman's been kind of up and down. And then from there, you're relying on Tyler McGill, a young pitcher, to kind of be a fourth starter on a playoff team, which is a lot to ask for him as well. So that's my biggest concern is the fact that they did not address starting pitching, especially because DeGrom's going to be out for a while. That is why I thought if they threw in Davies with Baez, I think I'd be talking about how happy I would be with this deal, because he is exactly what I'm talking about, what they kind of need, just a placeholder, really. That's kind of like what Rich Hill is, although Rich Hill might slide to the back into the rotation. But the thing is if everybody gets healthy, and that's a big if, who knows if that's going to happen, an extra pitcher is a good problem to have. You can slide into the bullpen, which I think is what I don't think they were going to go and get a bullpen piece. But if you get a guy like Ian Kennedy, Davies, we threw on, or Kyle Gibson, sure, he starts right now. If the Mets starting rotation gets fully healthy, he then slides to the bullpen and kind of covers some things up back there, which I think would help them there as well going into the playoffs. Instead, they're sitting here with no help to the bullpen, which I think has been better than you said, Mike. I know you don't trust Edwin Diaz, but for the most part, he has been dominant. And when he's on, he's totally on. So I trust him a little bit more than you do, and I trust this bullpen in general a little bit more. But still, they needed another starter. They didn't get it, and that's the biggest reason why I'm pretty disappointed with the Mets in this trade deadline.
Yeah, here's what I'll say about the deadline. First off, the guys that they didn't get, Kimbrel, that price was sky high. Nick Madrigal's a 300 MLB hitter, not minor league hitter, MLB hitter, former top 5 pick, top prospect. I remember him. He was such a thorn in the Yankees side. So that's a guy, obviously you don't want to give up that level of talent. Barrios, too, took the number 12 prospect in baseball. So your point, you're not asking for an ace, just asking for a controllable starter that can eat up innings. I think you texted me, I'm not asking for a lot here. It's like a 4 ERA. Give me someone like that. But just to go on, and Story also, we'll get into the Rockies later on, but the Story price tag was absurd. The Rockies don't know what they're doing there. But Bryant was the guy I thought they should have went after over Baez. And just because you mentioned, he said center field was his favorite position the other day. He kind of dropped that bomb. The Cubs are just giving him innings at third base, so he remembered to play the position. That's how good he is at all these kind of positions. He's such a plug and play. He mashes versus lefties. He does a lot that you could have had. And when you look at the price tag he went for, it wasn't crazy. It really wasn't. It was the Giants, I think, 9th. and 13th best prospects. The Mets ended up trading their number 6 prospect for Baez, who, by the way, I have no problem with that because his ETA is like 2025. So I have
he just came off surgery.
Major surgery. Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't really a huge loss. Yeah.
No. He's a long ways away, 2020 first round pick. So he's not even sniffing the big leagues anytime soon. So I have no issue dealing him. I would have rather you try to package something together with Bryant or get a Zach Davies, as you said. Trevor Williams hasn't had an ERA under 5 since 2018. That's not a guy that I would feel confident at all.
He's in AAA already. He's already in AAA. Hasn't even pitched in any for the Mets.
Yeah, so you mentioned that they liked him because he has options, and that's absurd to want a guy at the deadline because you can send him down. Like, you're supposed to get guys that impact your club. So that's ridiculous in its own sense. And Baez, who I know I've trolled you a little bit, Sam. I've texted you like his on-base percentage with fire emojis, 292 on base, which is horrible. But it's really not the worst they could have done. It's definitely better than doing nothing. The strikeouts, I don't care about strikeouts, as I just said, but they don't come with the walks, and that is the issue. He is a flawed hitter in that sense. Only 15 walks on the year. That's an issue. I don't know if he's going to fix it in year 7 or whatever. You're going to have to kind of live with that. But he is a run producer, 20-plus homers and everything. He hits lefties really well, above 300, and we know the Mets have struggled in that sense. So from that side, I like it. And then just to go on the pitcher aspect, it is completely unacceptable to not get anyone besides Rich Hill, to know DeGrom. I get them not announcing the DeGrom stuff because maybe they were in on someone that would, hurt their leverage a lot. But for Zach Scott to know, for Steve Cohen to know that Jacob DeGrom, the inflammation, that's never a good thing. You're shutting him down until September. To know that and to not upgrade, I think is a real lost opportunity. I saw a report, don't know how true it is. They had a deal with Kenta Maeda. The salary didn't match up, and then they backed out. That's another reason to be unacceptable. You take on that salary. We just owner baseball, all you've talked about is how you're willing to go all in. If that was the case, that's unacceptable. So I think when you look at it, you can be glad that they got a guy like Baez, but certainly very frustrated as you are. You have every right to feel the way you do, Mike, because, I think we're going to take a quick break here. We'll get more into the Mets in a second with the division, I think, and it's open for them. And they had a chance, this last week with the Braves, 5 games coming up, to put them to bed. They didn't do so. We saw the Braves buy, and now it looks like the Phillies also bought. They got Gibson, a guy you just mentioned, Sam, the Mets could have got. So it's going to be interesting there. We'll get more into that. We're going to take a quick break. Station ID. We'll be back with some more Mets on 90.7 FM.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
So we're back here on One-on-One after that quick break. And I think it's important when we're talking Mets and this deadline to put into context with the whole NL East, because I don't think you can just look at the Mets moves in a vacuum. You have to look at it in the reality of their division is really bad. They've had chance after chance to blow it open, to put these teams to bed. They haven't really been able to do so. They sit up 3.5. It's been a month and a half now or whatever of just 500 baseball. It hasn't hurt them in the standings. But at some point, do you get worried? We saw the Braves, I just mentioned. They added 4 bats at the deadline. They added a all-star level closer in Richard Rodriguez. From the Pirates, it seems that they're looking at this division. They see a golden opportunity, even with Acuna out, and they're going for it a little bit more than the Mets. Mike, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the whole NL East in that sense? Did the Mets do enough overall, I guess, to withstand the Braves and the Phillies who went all in?
Yeah, well, before I get to your question about the NL East, which I obviously want to talk about, before we went to break, Sam, you guys mentioned some things about Zach Scott that I just feel I need to get off my chest because they're just so annoying. So Sam, you said a couple of these things and I just want to share my thoughts on them. First off, the idea that you can replicate Jacob DeGrom is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We didn't want anyone because you can't replicate Jacob DeGrom. No blank Sherlock. Yeah, you can't replicate Jacob DeGrom, but you can get someone who's decent. I mean, that logic makes no sense. The chemistry thing, and you guys alluded to, if anyone's seen my Twitter, like I am just so annoyed by that. I mean, do you think, look, I'm not going to deny it's important. I like it when players get along. I think that's cool to have good vibes. I think it's great. But do you think Brian Cashman like went down to the Yankees locker room and was like, excuse me, Luke Voigt, I'm just wondering, would you get along with Anthony Rizzo? Would that be okay if I traded for him? No one does that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
The reason I brought it up is because I think this is something I didn't mention, but I think it's totally true, is that I think Lindor, when he does come back, is going to play with a lot more. He already plays with a lot of enthusiasm, but I think he will pick up his game and actually play better with the fact that he has.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sam, and I agree. Yeah. I think that honestly is going to help him, and I'm sure that'll help him with the mental side of things too, to have Baez there. Totally agree with that. And like I said, I do think chemistry is important, but the fact that they are saying it is the most important thing is what frustrates me. And that's why I can't, because the fact that they're saying we are going to value the chemistry first before we value the player and his performance is what's frustrating. At least that's how I feel, how it seems to me. And, the other thing is, and this is the last thing I'll say about Scott, and then I'll quickly address the NL East. And, well, by the way, all these things I'm bringing up is why I don't think Zach Scott should be the permanent GM of this team. I just don't, personally. The last thing I'm going to say is this, is because to me, it just feels overmatched by other GMs personally, because the thing is that, he kept saying the offers were laughable. Well, that says one of two things. Either number one, you don't know how to negotiate from a very high asking point. Obviously, someone's going to ask for the moon. Or number two, you overvalued your prospects, or you thought you were overly confident in your own team and didn't need to make more moves, which I disagree with personally. But that's not the point I want to make. The final point I want to make about Scott before I address your question, Ryan, so thank you for bearing with me, is that the whole idea of like, well, Carlos Carrasco is coming back, so that's like a deadline acquisition. Oh, we're going to have Syndergaard in September. The Mets could be 20 games under, and they're not going to be. But like, to say that you're planning on September is absurd when the division is up for grabs right now. The returns matter only if the Mets are still in it. Like, it's great that Carrasco is back. It is great that Syndergaard will come back. Hopefully, eventually, it's great that DeGrom will come back. Hopefully, at some point. And I agree, having those guys come back will be great. Having Carrasco come back already, even though he gave up that one home run, was great. But the returns are meaningless unless the Mets are still in it. So the fact that they're just only relying on the returns and hoping they can make it to September. I mean, look, the division's terrible, and this kind of segues into the division question. But like, to me, that's just very flawed thinking. And then obviously the last thing, this is really the last thing I promise I'll say about this, is that a lot of the heat is on Zach, which I think is fair because I think he is the face of the GM. He's the one that's talking about it. But Sandy has a role in this too. And what Sandy needs to realize is he doesn't work for the coupons anymore, aka the Wilpons. Like, he doesn't have to play like he has no money anymore. Like, Sandy, Steve Cohen is your boss now. Like, the thing you said about Kenta Maeda, I don't remember if it was Ryan or Sam, someone said about Kenta Maeda because of the salary. Like, I get they don't want to go over the luxury tax, but like, Steve Cohen has $13 billion. Like, I'm sure they could have worked it out somehow. Like, the idea that we're playing for money or we're getting Williams because he has a AAA option, that is a Wilpon move. Like, Sandy, I know you were fired in between, but like, you realize the Wilpons don't work here anymore. Like, I'm convinced that like Jeff, who still owns 1%, sees Sandy in the hallway. He's like, "Hey, what's up? You still work for me, right?" He's like, "Oh yeah, that's right." Like, I can't take it, but I digress. Thank you for bearing with me on the GM rant. This whole show has been very therapeutic for me. But to get quickly, and then I'll hear your thoughts as well on the division. The Phillies obviously feel they can still kind of go for it. They didn't make any huge moves. They got Ian Kennedy, they got Kyle Gibson, they got Freddie Galvis from Baltimore. All very solid. I think it's going to help them a lot. And the Braves, look, the fact that the Mets lost 3 of 5 to Atlanta is a killer. They had a shot. The Braves maybe would never have made these moves if the Mets had won 4 or 5 or were like, had swept up to the point of the trade deadline. Like, they had a chance to put Atlanta out of this, and they didn't. And so that's why Atlanta went out and got Jorge Soler and Adam Duvall and Eddie Rosario, outfielders to replace Acuna, who's obviously out for the year, and then obviously, Ozuna, who should never play baseball again. So, I mean, that's besides the point. But both these teams are going for it. And to me, you always hear the adage in sports of like, you got to step on the gas, like really get your opponent when they're down. Like, that's how you win. Don't give up. It's like in football when it's like you have a big lead in the first quarter, like you got to step on the gas. And to me, it feels like the Mets are playing out the clock. Like, they're like, oh, we're in first, we can just maintain. And that's such a dangerous strategy. Like, prevent defense, which is what the Mets are doing. And all these football analogies, I apologize for the non-football fans. Like, it doesn't work. So I'm very worried about this division for the Mets personally.
Yeah, so I'll start with a brief thing about Zach Scott. I kind of agree. I think he is a little bit, I don't know, just out of his element. He doesn't seem like he quite belongs in the kind of negotiation that goes on during the trade deadline. And I look at a guy like Brian Cashman, and I see somebody that is really good at making deals and working his way to get what he wants. Zach Scott just didn't seem like it seemed like the market was playing him instead of him playing the market.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I will say on that. But in terms of the division, it's interesting because at one instance, I don't have faith that the Braves or Phillies are going to come up and win the division. But at the same time, I don't have faith the Mets are going to win the division.
Yep.
Fully, if that makes sense. Like,
yes,
I just think the Braves certainly got better, but what they have shown all year is that they're a 500 team at best. And the Phillies did get a little better as well, but they're kind of the same thing, sitting right around 500. I think what the Mets are doing right now is dangerous because, like you said, they could have put the Braves away, but that's in the past. They already haven't put the Braves away. And now it's going to be a division that they're not going to be able to run away with. I really don't think so. With DeGrom out for another month, it's going to be them kind of having to hold on for kind of another month or so until DeGrom gets back fully healthy. And then when that happens, maybe by September, they have a little more breathing room by the middle of the month and they can be on their way to win the division. But it's definitely worrisome. I'm not too worried because of how weak the division has been. But I think the fact that they didn't get any starting pitching help and they're going to have to try and hold on to the next month is definitely concerning. And it seems like a recipe for kind of disaster here if the Mets find a way to let the Braves back in it, or if the Braves go on a run themselves and take away from the Mets, because the Mets have played 500 ball for a while now. And in this month as well, I think 500 ball is realistic for what they're losing in the starting pitching depth and what they have as a team right now. And if they play 500 ball, they might still be in first by the end of August. But if the Braves get hot, or if the Phillies get hot and they use these moves to be a better team, then they're going to be in first. They really can take over the Mets here. And that certainly is concerning when the Mets had a chance to kind of just bury these teams like the Braves and put them away. So, yeah, it's definitely worrisome. I think if this DeGrom injury didn't happen and he would come back, I think we'd be looking at this very differently. But with a guy like that, you can't understate how important he is to this team. And for me, I don't know. I think the one thing I want to say, I've been pretty negative, and maybe I'm kind of just like seeping into what Mike and Ryan and their energy, at least Mike's energy with the New York Mets. But I want to end it with a thought I've had about the Mets is that this is year one of a plan to win the World Series, right? And they were not supposed to do it this year, right? And I know you don't want to hear that, Mike, because they have first place and they have a good chance and the division is weak. I get all that. But you got to at least feel a little bit better about your situation because the future for this Mets team is up. This is not a win or go home. This is not a do or die kind of year for the New York Mets. They can get a lot better. They have an owner who finally is going to spend money, and DeGrom will come back in years to come and hopefully be healthy for a full season. And I think that's something we have to remember with this Mets team is they're in a better spot than everyone thought they would be. They didn't think they were going to win the division. Sure, it's a weak division and they can take it, but down the road into the future, this Mets team is only going to get better. And I think that's something to really think about and remind all Mets fans who are currently freaking out and will be freaking out over the next couple months with this division.
All right. Before Ryan, let me just real quick, and then you can wrap up the segment.
I say one positive thing, and
I have to. Look, you said the Met fan. I have to respond. It's like the presidential debates. You invoked my name. I have to get in here.
Yes.
This is what I'll say about this. Look, I agree the future is bright. Not even just at the major league level. You got Beatty down in Binghamton now, Alvarez in Brooklyn, top prospects. They're rebuilding the farm system. I'm not really rocker. Hopefully that deal gets done. I agree the future is bright. Trust me, having Cohen as an owner is night and day. I totally agree with that.
Yep.
That being said, I disagree a little bit that they weren't expected to win the division. I mean, with the number of moves they made in the offseason, and look, I'm not saying I thought they would win, but like you can't deny that I saw a lot of maybe not everyone, because I do think the Braves are also heavily favored as well. But I did see a lot
the Braves
of people
were the favorite.
Look, but I do think though that there were other people saying that the Mets had a real shot. So I'm not saying I went into this year thinking like we could be in contention. Now, the last thing I will say is this, and I do think the Braves were the better team going in. Obviously, they haven't lived up to that. I'm not going to deny that either. But the last thing I'll say is this: as the Mets showed in 2015, and obviously, look, it didn't end well at all. But anything can happen in October. Like these people that are saying like, oh, the Mets shouldn't have done a lot because the Dodgers are a super team now, or the Padres are a super team. You know, the Mets went into 2015. I get it. It's 6 years ago. It's a completely different roster. It means nothing. Or like the 69. Well, the playoffs were totally different back then. So I'm not going to use that. But like 2015, like, I'm sorry, when they went into 2015 playoffs, I didn't think they beat the Dodgers in the first round. I didn't think they beat the Cubs in the NLCS. Like, I never thought that this team would ever win one playoff round, let alone two, and get to the World Series. And who knows, maybe if the ball bounces a different way in the World Series, who knows what would have happened. I think game one was so important, but I could do a whole show on that. But the point is, I am not one of these people that's going to say like, I'm not patient. So that's also part of my problem, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, oh, like it's okay. We have next year. It's like, I've suffered my whole life. I'm 21 years old. Like, what do I got? 2006 and 2015 when they like they were, brides left at the altar. Like when it's there, when it's possible, and I'm not saying I expect them the World Series. Ask Andrew Galata. He thinks that they can win the World Series. He thinks they can be a player in the playoffs. Not even I think that. But my whole point is that I agree there's a bright future, but I disagree that means we have to like be accepting of a poor deadline or like if we don't do well. Like I just don't believe personally in accepting mediocrity. But that's all that I'll say. Ryan, close us out.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say here, too. I don't buy that point at all by Sam. Your window in the MLB, you don't know when it's going to open. You're trying to plan. Look at the Giants. They're in year zero of a plan, and they're seeing themselves in first place. They go out and get a Chris Bryant. You're aggressive. When you see this division, it's so –
the Mets went out and got a hobby bias.
But when you look at it like, oh, it's okay if they don't do this, I think it'd be an immense disappointment if they don't win this division, putting it on perspective.
I agree. Thank you.
It would be an egregious failure on their point. They have to win this division. They're 22 and 24 in their last 46. They haven't seen their lead change at all. When you have a stretch like that, a 46-game stretch, and you don't see your lead, dwindle at all, you got to win the division. You really do. We talk about windows. You don't know when it's going to open. This is a window. This is a very viable chance at the playoffs. This roster is good enough to make the playoffs. You have to go and take care of business. You're better than these other teams in the NL East. You can't let anyone jump you. You can't give anyone hope. You have to bury them. They have to win this division. Year one of a 5-year plan. You throw that out the window. This is year one of a year one because there's a good enough roster.
You don't throw that out the window. That's just throwing.
Don't throw it out the window, but don't make that your number one thing. Don't go into it.
No, I get it. I trust me. I've spent the show so far blaming Zach Scott and blaming for what they did with the starting pitching. And I'm not saying the 5-year plan is an excuse for what they did. I think you're right. They should win the division. They're the better team than the Braves and the Phillies, and it's a weak division, and they should go out and win it. But all I'm saying is that to make Mets fans feel better, to think about the future, there are years beyond this where the Mets can get even better in a better NL East where they can really be a true World Series contender.
Can I make a comparison?
All right, Ron, let me just get this one last thing in, and then you can say your point. The other thing I would say about looking to the future is the Mets or franchise. Look, as a Met fan, only Met fans understand this. So is the Mets organization, more than any other team in baseball, has been so guilty of selling their fans the future. And then when the future arrives, it's a disaster. I mean, the 80s Mets were built to be a dynasty. They were built to win 5 World Series. Doc and Darryl were supposed to be the next Babe Ruth and, I don't know, Cy Young. And look what happened. Now, a lot of it wasn't their, obviously drug addiction and all that. I'm not going to get into that. But the Mets fan in the 80s was sold the future. And then look what happened. 1 World Series, a choke in the NLCS, and then poof, it was over. That great Mets run that was supposed to happen never happened. What about Generation K in the early 2000s?
Have you ever experienced something like Steve Cohen? Have you ever experienced an owner like that come into a franchise?
But the thing is, though, but even the Yankee fan can tell me, the Yankee fan knows that, money isn't everything. The Yankee fan has had an amazing ownership group for years. They've had limitless pocketbooks, and for 20 years now, they've been right there, and they've never won. And my point is, and I'll just finish it with this: Generation K, like 2006. Like I am hopeful as a Met fan. I know people want to say I'm too negative. Like I am truly hopeful for this team in the future. When Steve Cohen bought this team, I was thrilled. I was so happy to be out of the coupon regime. I thought, hey, let's buy the Jets next because it's not football season. Just get ready for that. But the point is that, like, I am hopeful, but also I'm not going to fall victim to the same Mets trap that's been going on for 60 years, whether it was the 80s or Generation K in the 2000s or the 06 team with Reyes, Beltran, and Wright, or the 15 team when we had this great rotation of Matt, Syndergaard, and DeGrom that was supposed to be the future, the next, Braves team. Like the Mets have never, ever capitalized on these promises of future hope. And I'm not, history, if we forget the past, we're doomed to repeat it. And I refuse to forget history. And I refuse to simply buy into hope now after everything that's happened. And I don't think having an ownership change until there's results is going to make me change that opinion.
I refuse being positive and making myself feel better about the current situation.
You want me to stick my head in the sand and just deny what's going on? Like the team is not playing well. And this is a terrible history. All right, whatever. All right.
Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comparison, and then we're gonna wrap up. We're way over time here. It's okay. That's been a great discussion. I can't feel your pain as a Mets fan, Mike. I can acknowledge that. The one thing I can see with the plan stuff and why I'd never buy that is the 2017 Yankees. That was year one of a 5-year plan. They didn't get Verlander at the deadline because it was year one of a 5-year plan. He ended up being the reason they didn't get to the World Series, and they haven't sniffed it since. So you don't look at plans in this league. You got to optimize your window. And so whether they did that, I don't really know with the DeGrom injury, all that, whatever. Ton of fun talking to Mets with you guys. Really great conversation there. We are going to take a break here. We're going to be back with a great interview of a really friendly guy in Marc Mellon. He's an artist. It's really fun. He just sculpted a Jackie Robinson. And we're going to talk about that and everything else. So stay tuned for that and more on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back into One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM. Right now, we're joined by sculptor Marc Mellon, who sculpted in particular the Handshake for the century. You can see it, an awesome Zoom background. Apologies for you guys listening on the radio that you're missing out on that. But Marc, thank you first off just so much for taking the time with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. This is a magic moment in public sculpture in America. We're swapping out a lot of work, importantly. Things are coming down, which should never have been put up. Things that were meant to put fear in the hearts of Americans who just happen to be born Black. And we're at a point where cities around the country, large and small, are thinking about how we can better reference our diversity in our public art. So we're dusting off heroes from yesteryear who were never properly acknowledged, including many women, and otherwise looking at moments such as this magic moment between Jackie Robinson and George Shuba that reflect the diversity of our nation and embrace a future where America shows more tolerance and a better understanding of what equality really means.
Yeah, and I think you did a really nice job of, bringing that up, because that's what I wanted to start with, in particular, the handshake for the century and the significance of it with Jackie Robinson and George Strait, because I'm a pretty big baseball fan, but I really wasn't aware of this, honestly, before, I got introduced to you. So do you want to kind of just start off with going into maybe the historical significance of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was not aware of this particular moment either. A lot of people who are in the know, recognized this moment, and there are books about the preseason going into this moment in baseball and civil rights history. But now more people are going to know about it, and that's a good thing. It was over 75 years ago. It's important to understand that we had just come out of World War II, and where we had black troops and white troops in segregated units. In 1946, at the time of this handshake, our American armed forces were yet formally integrated. It's crazy to think that, but it wasn't until a year later that that change happened. When this moment happened in Jersey City, New Jersey, with 25,000 people in the stands cheering Jackie on, it was an fully integrated crowd. That in and of itself was novel for 1946 and would have been completely historic in the Deep South. So if you think of that, Jackie Robinson, when he wrote his biography, he talked about feeling that he had the weight of his race on his shoulders, that he knew that if he succeeded in baseball, that it would open up opportunities for all Black Americans in sport, but beyond sport, on the factory floor, in white-collar jobs, and ultimately in the boardroom. And Jackie, you're too young to know, but he was famously on the board of Chock full of nuts coffee when that was a big coffee brand, and he was on other boards as well. He really changed the profile of who would be considered for the jobs that make up corporate America. It wasn't just sports, and it was very important that his people be considered to be at least considered for employment across the board. And why not?
I love so much of what you said there about the impact of this statue and this moment on not just baseball, but about the world as a whole. And so much of your statues and your work kind of focuses, as you mentioned at the beginning, about the humanity of it and kind of the impact that your statues can have. So with all of that in mind, what made this project one in particular that you wanted to pursue and that you signed on for?
Well, I mean, look, I'm doing what I do. I'm a little older than perhaps I look, but I'm doing this for 45 years now. And when I started out, way at back in the mid 70s, I always thought there's going to be moments, there's going to be projects that are special, and I'd like to have the skill set to be considered. While early on in my career, first off, I got some real good traction in sports. I had an exhibit at the '84 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, just my sports work. I was soon after hired by the NBA to do the NBA MVP trophy, the Maurice Podoloff trophy. But as much as I love sports, I wanted to make sure that I had the skill set to do portrait busts and public statues, and so I worked at that as well. I also love dance, and I worked with dancers. And this is a piece that where athletes at their best are often dancers. They have the same sense of movement, and the emotional content of dance and sports is very similar. I pursued all those things, and then when it was time to find the sculptor for this particular project, they needed someone who could make these portraits authentic of Jackie Robinson and George Shuba, circa 1946, to capture the movement, the complex movement of the two figures, and someone who also had the experience doing public artwork, and which I have that as well. I have works that are of this scale and bigger from New Orleans to University of Rochester, right by the Great Lakes. I mean, I really have a good deal of public work out there. And so from that point of view, just my skill set, it was exciting. But if you look at with a little bit more depth at what I've done, I did a bust of that I called Becoming Muhammad Ali back around the year 2000. And so I associate him with the end of colonialism. That this is Muhammad Ali, more than any other person on this planet, is probably better known. His name is better known than anybody. Doesn't matter where you live. And it's because he fought for not just the right to box, but he for a period of time, because he objected to our war in Vietnam, he was banned from boxing in America for a period of time. And so he really became a civil rights icon as well, and globally beloved eventually. Over time, he became, when Muhammad Ali passed away, and I got this from some of the, one of the white board members at the Ali Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. This guy said to me, I know my neighbors well, and I know their history. And I know that not everyone had good things to say about Muhammad Ali in the early years, but they grew to love and respect him. And what I saw when the hearse traveled through the streets of Louisville, neighbors who had been less than equality driven, people who did not have a strong sense of social justice years before, were there standing and paying respect. And that's the power of when a great athlete can speak to our times and speak to a better nation. The reality is that whatever your background, at some point, your ancestors, most of us, were newcomers, and the newcomers in general were not well welcomed. I mean, they had to pay their dues. It's just a different deal when you think of ancestors being brought over on a slave trip, on a slave ship. It's a different deal. And what was important for me in this project was to better understand the Black experience before Jackie Robinson. And I can advise you all to go to Ken Burns's work in baseball, but beyond that, to Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s work, the great PBS documentaries that he's produced. You go through, as I did, carefully, the history of Reconstruction, There were black baseball players playing in what was considered the major leagues in the 1880s. And then hard stop. There was a gentleman's agreement. We're not going to let these guys play professional ball anymore. Not with us. And that was Reconstruction from the 80s on, 1880s. There's a connection from pre-Civil War and how Black Americans were treated, especially in the South, but not only in the South. There was a lot of toxic racism in the North and the West as well. Their experience is different than other immigrants. Barack Obama was a whole nother revelation that to have our first Black president is something you could not possibly conceive of back in 1946, when Jackie Robinson, all he was hoping for was the right to play professional baseball as a Black man. We've made extraordinary strides, but we've got a long way to go. And I'm not just talking about how we accept people of other colors. It's about other religions. It's about other ethnicities. If anyone who accepts the American way of life and understands our democratic system should be welcome. And if you can go that far to embrace our Constitution, this is in the news every day. We're looking at it in real time during the hearings this week. And it's as timely as ever. It's more timely than ever, because sadly, a good percentage of our population is willing to abandon the basic checks and balances of our democracy. And that is terribly dangerous for the future of anyone in America who's a minority of any kind. So here we have one of many statues that are being planned around the country that will better embrace the idea that America is still the land of opportunity, that America still has that torch that the Statue of Liberty raises high. We're at the time where we're trying to shine up that torch, and those who are actively doing it get a special sense of self accomplishment. Because we're doing it for our children and for our grandchildren, knowing that if you have a more welcoming world, more welcoming America, we can again be that beacon to the rest of the planet. We're only 4%. This is crazy. We're only 4% of the population of the world. It's hard to fathom that, since our economy is still something like 30% of the world's economy, but we're only 4% of the world. We fight way above our weight. Our influence is way above our numbers, and when America speaks and does the right thing, we send messages to countries around the globe and to leaders in every country around the globe. And we can send toxic messages, or we can send messages that there's a better way, that if you embrace democracy and the rights of minorities, within your populations, then it doesn't have to be a caste system. And this is not just the American history. There are tiers of the way people are treated globally in countries where you wouldn't even imagine it. And the tribalism that exists, not just between nations, but within nations, continues to be a challenge to the future of our planet. If we can send messaging out as a stronger, more welcoming America, that there's a better way, we help in ways that it's hard to even conceive. We help in obvious ways, but we help people think differently about what their future can be, and that's in every way a good thing.
Yeah, I think you just did a really good job of kind of talking about how there's a lot more that goes into your sculptures than just the physical things. You need to have a great understanding of the background and everything. So I really appreciate there. And just one last question, just while we go full circle here, because you've obviously been in the industry for a long time, as you talked about, you've accomplished so much. Where does this rank as maybe an accomplishment or project for you overall for everything you've done?
You just made me a little teary-eyed. This was a Grand Slam home run, and it was in the ninth inning and we were down. It really feels, and it was walk-off. It was it feels like the kind of thing you dream about when you're just starting out. But I want to emphasize, as a kid, first learning these skills, I did get a good liberal arts education first, but a lot of history, a lot of philosophy, and that's helped a lot in my understanding of the world. But that understanding that as an individual, you can make a difference is something I'd like to emphasize today as I speak to two college students on their way to their lives and careers, and to your broad audience. It's you need to rethink, if you haven't yet, what the possibilities are broadly, and remember it's not a race. That you can. If you can change your mind about career paths and what have you, if you find something that you're good at, and I found sculpture, I was amazed that my hands did what I wanted them to when I started doing art. What's wonderful about art is that you can really address any and all of your interests. But whatever it is that you choose, I play with clay, and I can make statements that have global significance. So whatever your career path is, think about what you can do, and think about what you can do if you have the audience. When I say the audience, it could be in the business world, it could be on radio, it could be anything. But if you're coherent in your thinking and comfortable in your presentation, and have something to add to our global discourse, it's in some ways more fun to think of yourself as a leader than a follower. So I urge you all to figure out how to lead.
That's really well said. And then the last question I wanted to ask you, is I'm curious, is when you think about this sculpture and you think about the sculpting media in general, what do you think it can do that just a photo or just knowing the history cannot?
When you approach public sculpture, there's an immediacy to it. There's a reason that going back to the Greeks and Romans, and to the great religions born around the globe, that most religions created images to worship. They they created, whether it's the Catholic Church and or the great Buddhist sculptures that were created. There's a history across the board of images that help us think of what our values are, that refer to our values. They can be used for different purposes, though. So when the toxic work of the 1920s went up, honoring Confederate leaders and being put up in cities and towns that were diverse but not welcoming to the other, they were put up for the wrong reasons. And we have the continued opportunity to put up public sculpture that speaks to contemporary values of acceptance, of equality, of diversity. And this sculpture speaks to all those things in just a very basic way. A number of sculptures just in the last year have honored the suffragette movement. It's 100 years ago, women could not vote in America. And you think about that, that's also a little crazy, isn't it? It's the right to vote is something that we need to cherish and respect and fight to maintain. And it's under attack in many states across the country. There's not an issue of import that public sculpture cannot speak to. That's really the point, and that art cannot speak to. And I'm another level of proud that I created this piece of public art. And I'm looking forward to the next and the next. I'm working on a bust now of Greta Thunberg. I mean, she's old, 17 or 18, but I think she's just an extraordinary presence in our fight to recognize and react to the global warming going on. And I don't even know where the bust is going to go, but I do know that I'll display it. And if it inspires one person, then that's great. One person who becomes a leader in the fight. When you look about what's happening to our planet, Greta, who she publicly acknowledges that she's autistic and she has her own issues. I think the purity with which she approaches global warming is part of the fascination that I have, the appeal. She thinks we are out of our minds that our leaders are out of their minds for not doing more. And she's absolutely right. She opened my eyes to another level. I have other projects that I'm working on currently. This guy named Raphael Lemkin, back in the 1918, World War I, he goes to his law professor in what was then part of Poland, and he says, "What's the deal with countries killing populations within their borders? What's the global legalese behind it? What's illegal about it?" And his professor says, "Well, nothing." He spent the rest of his life working on the concept of genocide. He created the word genocide. There was no word for it. And it took him his virtually his entire life till 1949 to convince the United Nations to accept the genocide conventions. I'm working on his bust now as well. I don't know where it's going to go, but it needs to go somewhere along with the story that as an individual, you can make a difference. The way Greta is making a difference and will be, I believe, for the rest of her life. The way he did, the way Elie Wiesel, who I've done busts of, made a difference in our understanding of war and peace and tolerance, and the need that we be vigilant because we have to be on guard against the next crazy, the guy who wants to grab the military tools of his country and wreak havoc. These are important issues that are ongoing. They don't go away. They don't go away. And it's part of the yin and yang of our world. I had a great patron who used to tell me, Mark, it's a beautiful world and it's a horrible world. And it will and always be those two things. And it's for us to who are paying attention to that, to try to make it more beautiful and to try to tamp down the horror. We're doing it successfully, globally, but not what we could do. Not what we could do. You know, we can make it even better.
Right. And so we will be sure to make sure to look out for more of your work. Some of the stuff you're talking about, it seems really interesting. Marc Mellon, thank you so much for spending the time with us. We really do appreciate it. We will be right back with more one-on-one on 90.7 FM.
Thank you so much.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Sam Davis, along with Ryan Gregware and Mike Leegan, here for some baseball headlines. We've spent plenty of time talking about all the moves in baseball for the New York Mets and the New York Yankees at the trade deadline, but we still have all the other Major League Baseball teams and a very busy trade deadline. Unless you were like living under a rock yesterday, you saw plenty of incredible deals go down. There were 32 trades in 2 days alone and over 40 trades throughout the week. The headliner of them all, I think it's safe to say, is the Los Angeles Dodgers, who made a blockbuster deal to acquire Max Scherzer and Trey Turner from the Washington Nationals in exchange for 4 prospects, and 2 of them top prospects being pitcher Josiah Gray and catcher Keibert Ruiz. Ryan, I'm going to start with you here. First of all, what are your thoughts on this trade for Scherzer and, of course, Trey Turner?
Yeah, and a monumental, massive blockbuster trade that almost wasn't. If we go back even 5 hours or so before, there was a deal in place to send Scherzer to the Padres. Great need there. Their starters have underperformed this year. That would have been a nice fit. But, while the deal was agreed to, it wasn't finalized or anything. The Nats, I think, leaked that. They wanted to see if anyone could top them. And the Dodgers came in and they put the hammer down. I give them all the credit in the world after winning a World Series to still be as aggressive. I would love this if I'm a Dodgers fan. Obviously, Max Scherzer, Phil's not even really a need. It's more of a want. And that's, I think, you're dealing with the riches here. You're dealing to keep these guys away from other teams in your division. Right now, with Corey Seager out, he's on a rehab assignment. Trey Turner goes to short. He's going to move to second at some point, and then you're at a point, you look at this ridiculous lineup, you're either benching Cody Bellinger, who the only reason that's a conversation is because he's struggled a ton this year. He's still an MVP. B, you're benching Chris Taylor, who was an all-star this year. He plays all around the diamond, and there's a very reasonable scenario where he's on the bench. Or A.J. Pollock, who's been top 5 in OPS for the outfield the last 3 years. He's been awesome for them. So this was an absolute riches. Obviously, the rotation, Kershaw, Scherzer, Bueller, Urias, Price, Gonsolin. We don't know what's going to happen with Bauer. That doesn't even matter. They don't need him at all. He can be away. That legal issue, that's not a concern for them at all right now because this rotation is stacked. This lineup is stacked. The Dodgers, best team on paper. They are going for it again. One World Series wasn't enough for them. I can't say enough about this. This move from the Dodgers perspective. Nationals, they definitely were willing to trade Scherzer. That was a no-brainer. Trey Turner, it seemed like they need to be blown away. He's on their contract for next year also. So that's another wrinkle. You have Corey Seager on the last year of his deal. Looks like he's on the way out with Trey Turner filling that void. Just there's not really one negative, I think, from the Dodgers perspective. They shattered the luxury tax, the one team that is willing to go over to pay the premium. And so you're going to get rewarded when you do so. And that's exactly what the Dodgers did. So I give them an A+ for this trade. They couldn't have knocked it out of the park, even more.
Yeah, I would say that, look, I think it's a great deal for both sides. I mean, look, I don't think the weirdest thing for me is I find it kind of strange that like the Nationals won the World Series 2 years ago and now they basically blew everything up. Look, Scherzer, pending free agent. I mean, it's still possible they could get rid of him and he can sign in the offseason like a Chapman kind of deal. So, I mean, look, why not get rid of him? Turner, a little more surprising that they got rid of him, especially the fact that he's not an independent free agent, the fact that they have another year of control with him. But from a Dodgers perspective, it makes a lot of sense because, look, for me personally, I think right now it's weird because Seager's hurt and Turner is he's got COVID, so he's not even playing right now. So my thing is, like, I think when they're both healthy, honestly, I put Turner at second and I put Seager at short. And obviously you got Justin Turner at third and Pujols, who's still, he's not who he was, but he can still, put it out of the yard sometimes. So, I mean, that's still pretty solid infield all around. Look, it makes a lot of sense for the Dodgers. They needed rotation help for the Scherzer side. I mean, Ryan mentioned it, look, Kershaw's hurt. He'll be back soon, hopefully. And then obviously Bauer, he'll probably never pitch in baseball again, nor should he, in my opinion. I mean, he's just not a good guy, to say it simply. That being said, so the deal makes a lot of sense. Scherzer has a 2.76 ERA this year, 147 strikeouts, top of his game. Obviously, he had a little bit of an injury scare for a little bit, but, he had to start on Thursday. Seems fine. I think it's a great deal for both sides. And then for the Nationals, look, it's surprising that they blew it up. I mean, not surprising in that they were kind of out of it, but surprising that it's gotten to a point just 2 years after World Series where they did blow it up. I mean, I guess in that 2019 year, they did go on a run, but the prospects they're getting back, I mean, Ruiz and Gray, I mean, these are good guys. I can't sit here and tell you that I've scouted these guys and they're going to be great prospects from what the analysts say, though. It seems to be a good move. As a Met fan, I'm a little concerned that now the Nationals have all these great prospects coming up. But I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Dodgers, look, I think the Dodgers, it's to the shock of everyone, and I said this a couple weeks ago on one-on-one, I think the Giants are going to win the division. I think the Dodgers will be one of the wild card teams. But now it's Scherzer and Turner coming in. I mean, look, are the Dodgers the team to beat now in the NL? I mean, I would say they are. I mean, I think they are. I mean, you could say the Padres maybe, but the Padres pitching isn't like anything to be that afraid of. And of course, Sergio went to the Padres. And I think the other thing to think about, interesting also with Turner, is that, Seager's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. So now that they have Trey, like, is this kind of a deal where it's like, are they really going to actively pursue Corey, or are they just going to like, we got Turner, we'll move him back to short? So that's something to think about. But overall, I think it's a great deal for both sides. Yeah,
starting with the Nationals, I think if you're going to blow it up, you might as well really go for it, which is what they're doing, and really blow it up, which I mean, I understand. I think they weren't catching whether that be the Mets at the end of the year in the top of the NL East or somebody else, they weren't going to make any ground up. I really don't think. I don't think they were a contender in this division. And if you don't win the division in the NL East, you're not making a wild card, obviously, with the NL West. So they didn't really have any playoff hopes, I don't think, or if they were, they're pretty slim. So I don't mind them going in it and really, moving the needle, getting some really good prospects back. The Trey Turner deal and throwing him in with Max Scherzer was a little surprising because of that extra year of control, like you said. I think it's going to be a really interesting scenario for the Dodgers with Corey Seager and Trey Turner. I really think Trey Turner is going to be their guy, and I think Corey Seager is going to hit free agency, and somebody's going to score big with him because Trey Turner just fits the Los Angeles Dodgers for me. Just even when he was playing for the Nationals, like, I don't know about you guys, but I could totally see him in a Dodgers uniform. He just looks like he can fit that mold really well and be their shortstop for the future. So that's interesting for them as well. And it's huge. I mean, I respect the Dodgers a ton for, first of all, like you guys said, taking away from the Padres, a division rival, a team you might play in a wild card or be kind of battling it out for the division. Not only are you making yourself so much better by getting Max Scherzer, but you're also making the Padres worse. And we're going to talk about a little bit later about who won and lost the trade deadline. I think the Padres might be one of those losers because they didn't get a guy like Scherzer that the Dodgers were kind of able to take away. So that's a part of this as well. And for the Dodgers, I respect the fact that they're not sitting on their World Series victory from 2020. They're deciding to actively pursue another one. They're really going to go out and say, we're going to take this into our own hands and try and take that division. But my question, Mike, you said, you thought about the Giants before being kind of the favorites in the division, and then the Dodgers now. With Scherzer, things are changing. Ryan, I'm going to go to you first on this. Do you think the Giants have what it takes to kind of hold things off? We're going to get into Chris Bryant in a minute, but do you think the Dodgers now with this move are the clear favorites in not only the National League, but really to win the World Series?
Yeah, I've thought all along that this is the Dodgers division. I know the Giants have came out of nowhere, been one of the top two shockers in baseball. I talked about earlier, you don't know when your window is going to open. They were looking for a long rebuild. They're doing this with veterans. Their prospects still really aren't here, Joey Bart, some other guys. And so to see what the Giants are doing, I think has been shocking. It's been awesome, though. They have a great fan base, everything like that. But I never really thought that they would win this division. They did take 2 of 3 from the Dodgers, I think, last week, which, I don't want to, look into the tea leaves here, but that had to play a role in the Dodgers being aggressive because the wildcard game, I think I texted this to you guys, it's going to get exposed this year a little bit. And I love it from a baseball fan perspective. My team's been in it 3 times now, but it is so stressful. And to see either, 2 of these 3 teams, Padres, Giants, Dodgers, whichever order, that has 9 innings for their season, it's really, it's unfortunate from the sense
it's unfair, to be honest.
It's unfair. It is unfair.
Yeah.
These are stacked rosters, and like you look at the Mets, who won't have as better records than these guys. They'll have a nice series to work things out, and to have 9 innings for your season is totally unfair. I think we could be looking at a to win or 2 of 3 at some point down the line, just because I think baseball understands. We saw it last year with COVID. 2 of 3, let teams really play more than one game. Starter gets knocked up and that's it. It doesn't matter how many prospects you traded, how all in you went. One pitch can literally, and I know usually that can determine your season, but it's one game, do or die. So I think from that perspective, it's going to get exposed a little bit, but I don't think the Giants have what it takes. I never really thought so. I thought they're going to slow down at some point. They just don't have the roster that the Dodgers do. And at some point, the guys are going to come together. I know Kershaw's hurt right now. Yeah, Cody Bellinger's hitting 160. Kershaw will come back. Cody Bellinger will rake. Things will come into place for the Dodgers now, especially Trey Turner once he comes back from COVID. Max Scherzer's having another all-star year. I think there's just too much talent for them to slip away. You're coming off the World Series. A hangover is expected, at least a little bit, and that hangover for them is still like 25 games over 500. Kenley Jansen struggled a ton recently. I think he blew like 4 straight saves. So, that's hurt them a little bit. You flip 2 of those, and they're probably tied for the division right now. So a little bit of bad luck, a little bit of weird circumstances, but I do expect at the end of the day, Sam, the Dodgers will take care and win this NL West.
Yeah, I would say, look, so with the Giants, I'm honestly just going out on a gut feeling here. I mean, I look at the roster of the Giants. I'm not blown away by anybody. There's not someone I really fear on that roster. I'm like, oh my God, but it's like, just from what they've done to this point, I mean, look, I'm not going to say they're going to do well in the playoffs, but like, sometimes you just have those magical runs, those teams that come out of nowhere. And I don't know, it just feels like the Giants are that team. And I just think it's kind of ironic, with the Padres and the Dodgers, they were so hyped up going into the regular season. And the Giants, who everyone thought would be terrible, are now this great team with these veterans, so it's very interesting to me. I just something in my gut that tells me that the Giants are going to pull out the division. I don't know what it is. I just think they're a good team. I never would have thought a team managed by Gabe Kapler would be any good, but I mean, I guess one of them is. I'm not a fan of Gabe Kapler at all. But anyway, as far as the Bryant trade, though, because that's what we're talking about when it comes to the Giants here, and I think that's what really stands out is how they traded for Chris Bryant. And I think it's interesting with the Giants. They were somewhat a lot like the Mets, where it was like division leader, standing pat at the deadline, not really doing much. I didn't really see him with the Giants were really in on many people. It seemed like they were just kind of meandering. And to get Chris Bryant, I mean, that's huge. I can't overstate how big that is for the team. I mean, Bryant's numbers the past month or so haven't been great, but I mean, Evan Longoria, the starting third baseman, has been out. And, the guy like Brandon Belt, another guy who they rely on, has been out. So to bring a guy in Bryant who has playoff experience, he's a leader, he can hit, he can play anywhere, as we talked about earlier when we talked about the Mets. I think it's a good move for the Giants. And like I said, I still think that they're the team that's going to win the division.
Mike, what you said about the Giants is interesting because I kind of get that feeling too. It seems like when you look at their roster, not like they're bad players, but guys are certainly overperforming, and the team has just overperformed and been really impressive. But we're past the point where it can be seen as a fluke. I mean, this team is a good team. They played enough games in that division where this team is for real. So I think they're certainly going to give the Dodgers a run for their money. And maybe like we're going to get into now, this Chris Bryant trade, of course, to the Giants, which was very close to the deadline, really exciting trade for them. A piece they really needed. I think Giants fans would be very upset if this team would have stayed put, especially with what the Dodgers did at the deadline. And then the Padres here and there making some moves as well. So Chris Bryant, he's going to fill a need for the Giants, of course. He's going to play third base a little bit for them. Evan Longoria is hurt right now. Brandon Belt's hurt as well, the corner infield positions. And Chris Bryant, like we mentioned kind of with the Mets earlier, he can play anywhere. He can play in the outfield as well. That versatility is huge for this Giants team, and he's definitely going to be a valuable part for them as they go down the stretch. So, Ryan, I'll go to you here. What are your thoughts on the Chris Bryant trade and what that's going to do for this Giants team?
Yeah, I was ready. We'll go into winners and losers for a second. To have the Giants as my number one loser because with 7 minutes to go to the deadline, they had done nothing. And I didn't think they could stand pat here. They couldn't watch the Dodgers stack up. They couldn't watch the Padres added Adam Frazier and Daniel Hudson. They couldn't do nothing. And Chris Bryant made a ton of sense. You mentioned Evan Longoria out. Thairo Estrada, former Yankee, now in left field, shaky there, not his natural position. To get a guy like Chris Bryant who can solve every problem. He hits lefties. He can play third base until Longoria is back. Get Wilmer Flores, who's not a great defender, off of third base. And then when he's back, you can plug him anywhere in the outfield. You really can. He's that versatile. He can hit. He knows how to win. I think, a lot of guys on this Giants team have won. But I always think that's an important aspect when you're bringing in a guy who's been in the World Series. He's been in huge games. He knows how to hit. He's had nice playoff runs before. So I really like this move for the Giants. I did not want them to stand pat. I think that would have been a really bad look. We talk about your window. It's open right now. You got to go grab it. So I really do like the move for the Giants for sure. I just talked about how I don't think it ends up winning them the division, but that's okay. They'll be in a wild card game. Interesting to see because they really did come out of nowhere. Like if we really do look at this beginning of the year, I did not see this coming at all. I'm really shocked that they were able to put it together. It looked they were heading to a fire sale. I know you said you don't like their manager, Mike, but you got to give him credit. It clearly didn't work in Philly. It's working out in San Francisco. Analytical department has overran things, and you obviously see wins with that because that's what the baseball is nowadays. Analytics run the sport. So Giants, I give them a ton of credit for getting Chris Bryant. Also didn't trade any of their top tier prospects. They traded, I think, their number 9th and 12th. So that's always a great sign. You don't have to give up serious capital there. So yeah, overall, really good deadline for the Giants. They did what they could, and now we're going to see if they can back it up and hold on to the NL West.
Yeah, the Giants are certainly seem to be relevant. I mean, the further they go, the less they seem like this is just a Cinderella year. This team seems like they're here to stay, whether that be winning the division or, of course, slipping down to the wild card, which is just unfortunate for whoever loses that National League wild card game. I do feel really bad for them just because of how good this NL West is. But from a regular baseball fan perspective, I tell you, the NL West is going to be extremely, extremely exciting to watch. It's already been exciting. It's going to be even more exciting down the stretch here for the last 2 months of the season. We're going to take a quick break. And on the other side, we're going to talk winners and losers of this trade deadline as we've had a little time to sleep on all these moves that have been made. Stick around to one-on-one. We'll be right back.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I told you we'd be right back, and here we are. Sam Davis, Ryan Gregware, Michael Leegan. We got to get into trade deadline winners and losers. As we've had time, like I said, to kind of sleep this off, there was so many trades. It was overwhelming at times with how many trades there were going on throughout the week, but especially the last couple of days, like I said. So there are certainly winners, there are certainly losers. Mike, I'm going to start with you. I want you to give me 2 winners and 2 losers, but maybe just start with some winners. Let's start with winners. So give me 2 winners from the trade deadline for you.
Yeah, both my winners are Chicago teams. I'm going to go with the White Sox and the Cubs. I think both are winners. I know White Sox is a little more obvious. Cubs, maybe it's a little bit of a controversial pick, but with the White Sox, look, they got Kimbrel, but the crazy thing about the White Sox is now they have 2 of the best closers in the game. They got Kimbrel and Liam Hendricks on their team. And I mean, that's honestly what I wanted the Mets to do. I think that would have been a great thing to have Kimbrel and Diaz, but of course it's not what happened. But for Chicago, I think that's a huge plus, especially with Kimbrel, playoff experience. Whether that playoff experience is good, that's up to you. But, I think he's still one of the top closers in the game, having a resurgent season. And, I think it was a good trade. And, they have a stacked lineup, Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, still a good team. Obviously, Tony La Russa, whatever you think of him as a manager, he's an experienced manager, and he's kind of put this team over the top a little bit. And they have a nine-game lead on the Indians. So I think the Central is kind of theirs. And getting another top closer, I mean, the playoffs are all about pitching. And, they have guys like Lance Lynn in the starting rotation, but, the bullpen, you can never have a good enough bullpen. And they got some other arms in there, too, aside from 2 essential closers now. So I think the White Sox are a total winner. I think they're, one of the teams to beat in the American League. They were already, and they certainly didn't hurt that going in with this move, excuse me. And then the other team, the Cubs, I think it's a little more of a kind of a hotter take. Not that I'm someone that gives really hot takes all the time, but maybe I do, depending on who you ask. But the Cubs, look, I think, and a lot of Cubs fans were, they were upset. They were, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo. These are guys that, Javi Baez, these are guys that won them a title. And if you're a Cubs fan, you went, there weren't even people alive who remember the last championship. So the end 100+ year curse. I mean, that is just crazy. So, obviously fans are going to be emotional. They're going to be attached to those guys. So I get why maybe some Cubs were upset. I think some other ones were maybe disappointed in the return. That being said, I think the return is great. I mean, we're not great, but very solid. You got top 10 prospects from the Yankees, Giants, Padres, and Mets. So, I mean, that's a pretty decent haul. I think about the Mets, Pete Crow Armstrong. Look, we said it before. He just had shoulder surgery. But that being said, he was a first-round pick very recently. He's a top 5 prospect in the Mets system. And, to get a bunch of top 10 prospects from around the league in organizations like the Yankees, like the Padres, who are, quality organizations in terms of bringing guys up, that's good news. And also they got, the White Sox second baseman, Madrigal, who is just, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name, but I know that that's right. Okay, cool. So I'm not a White Sox fan. I can't sit here and tell you that I saw this guy in 2020, especially with the divisions not playing and the Mets haven't also played the White Sox, and I haven't seen the Yankees play the White Sox. And so, but the point is that their second baseman who they traded to the Cubs, even though he's battled through injuries throughout most of his career so far, in the short time that he's been here, he's put up some solid numbers. And, you got rid of guys who were not coming back. I mean, Javi maybe, but, I think Rizzo was probably going to get a bigger offer elsewhere. Chris Bryant was definitely gone, especially, he's had a contentious relationship with the front office, the whole service time thing and all that. So, I think overall the Cubs, if you're a Cubs fan, I understand it's tough for you, but I think overall it was pretty solid for them. And like I said, it's a lot for the White Sox. So both Chicago teams are my winners.
Yeah, I'll go now. First off, Sam, I appreciate you starting with some positives because we've had some negative topics.
A negative show. We got to switch it up,
So I like starting with some winners here. And I'll go with the Marlins, who are clearly selling. And I really, really like what they did, and particularly with Starlin Marte. He had a really nice year for them, 1 year rental. They tried to work out an extension. The two sides were not close. So dealing him was the very smart, sensible move. They had to. But what they got from him, they got Jesus Luzardo, who's having a very bad year, 6.87 ERA. But this guy has just absurd stuff. Like, there's really no other way to put it. High 90s fastball. He was a 12th ranked prospect in baseball just a year ago with the A's. For them to deal him, I saw a lot of A's fans were furious, even though Marte's had a great year and everything. Luzardo was a all-time pitching prospect, really great stuff. And the Marlins, to their credit, and this isn't the old Marlins who had stacked lineup and couldn't pitch. They had the 7th best ERA in baseball. I was really surprised when they said that on the Yankees broadcast last night. And if you look at the 2022 rotation, it's really legit. Alcantara, Lopez, Rogers, Sixto Sanchez, and Luzardo as the 5. They don't need him to be anything more than that. All these guys are under 25. That is a really scary rotation. Obviously, not every pitcher turns out. 3 or 4 of those guys are having great years now. And if you're able to turn him around, that's huge. A great buy low option, getting him at low value, trading him for a rental. He's not going to re-sign with the A's. You aren't going to keep him. So huge credit to the Marlins front office there. It looks like they really are building something. So all the credit in the world. The other winner, I'll give 2 here because one's a cop-out, just the fans of baseball. Like the fans of baseball were really.
Wow. That is a cop-out.
I have another one, though. The fans were really treated to a great deadline. We've seen some really lackluster runs. I remember I used to actually go to Fordham baseball camp and live in the area. I took off one Friday the afternoon to watch the trade deadline coverage of the camp. I missed the last day of the camp. Nothing happened that day. No trades at all. This deadline would have been worth it to take off because of the amount of deals. So, I give credit there to the game of baseball, all the buyers and stuff. But I'll go with the Astros. I hate giving them credit, but, the bullpen has been a weakness for them this year. They had 3 pieces. Yimi Garcia from the Marlins, Kendall Graveman, who maybe we'll get into with the losers here, but 0.79 ERA, he's been phenomenal with Seattle, really good piece. And then Phil Maton from the Cleveland Indians, really good peripherals. I trust that analytical, storm to turn it around there. So the Astros winner, fans of baseball, Marlins, those are my winners here. We'll see what the Astros do with that great bullpen, but it's certainly, you always improve your bullpen if you're a good team. I firmly believe that, even if you have a great one. And they were ones who did it with 3 impact arms. So those were my winners of the trade deadline this year.
Well, I mean, rotation next year. So certainly a team, certainly on the up and up, and they had a pretty good 2020 as well, for what it was worth. But my winners, I mean, we have to say the Los Angeles Dodgers, although that might be kind of a cop-out as well, but certainly they are a winner. If you get Max Scherzer and Trey Turner in a trade deadline, they had a need at starting pitching with their injuries and other issues, of course, with Trevor Bauer. They went out and got Scherzer and certainly filled that need and more. And then Trey Turner is a guy they can look to sign in the future as well. We talked about that, but the Dodgers are a clear winner, I think, and especially because they took Scherzer from the Padres and they kind of took from the NL West and their competitors out there. My other winner is the Atlanta Braves, actually. I think they had a huge week, like we talked about, against the Mets, where they were able to win that series, 5-game series. They were able to take 3 of those games. That changed them from, if they would have lost a lot of those games in the series, they probably would have been in sellers. Now they turned into buyers because of a good series against the Mets. They felt like they have a chance in the division. And they did both. I mean, they're certainly have plenty of injury issues this year, Acuna being at the top of that list. But go out and get Jorge Soler, I think, was a really nice bat to get. Adam Duvall's not bad at all either. And then Richard Rodriguez from the Pirates, that's another really solid, really underrated, I think, pickup for the Braves. So I think they're in a really good position to maybe challenge the Mets a little bit, especially with what we talked about with all the Mets pitching depth and concerns there. And a couple other teams that I wouldn't call flat out winners, but certainly got a lot better is the Giants, who we talked about with Chris Bryant, and then also the Blue Jays, who were able to get Jose Barrios. It was a very big cost to get a guy like him, but the Blue Jays certainly need help pitching. They need you have Hinge and Ryu, but you kind of need an ace or somebody at the top of that rotation to work with Ryu. And Barrios seems like he's going to be that guy. He's had a pretty good year for the Twins. So they did give up a lot, but I think the Blue Jays, some people might call them winners. I wouldn't go that far just because there's still a long way to go in the division and certainly in the wild card as well. But they definitely got better, just like the Giants. So that now switching over to some kind of pessimism, like we've done a lot in this show. Two losers. Ryan, I'm going to go to you first on this one. Give me two losers from the trade deadline.
Yeah, first off, the Rockies, I don't understand why they held on to Story at all. I get they're going to offer him the qualifying offer. He's going to decline. They're going to get a first-round pick. It might be lower. But, I don't understand. This was a buyer's market, right? We saw top-tier prospects flying off the board to stand pat being, as low in the standings as they are. I don't get that at all. You're clearly not going to re-sign Trevor Story. You're teasing the fans, get some impact prospects. He could have got them. And it seemed like a lot of teams were interested in Story. I know the Yankees were, Mets were, and the Rockies were not willing to compromise there. So I really give him criticism there. Also, to keep a guy like John Gray, are you going to contend in the next year and a half? No. Are you going to re-sign him? No. So why not trade him now for really good assets? We saw Jose Barrios, you just mentioned. He got traded for the number 12 prospect in baseball. You could have got some real good capital here. Daniel Bard keeping a 36-year-old reliever who certainly would have had interest too. I don't understand holding on, especially in this market. You won't have every trade deadline where this many teams are willing to buy and getting bidding wars. So that's an easy loser. The other is the Mariners. I really don't understand this at all. If you look at this last week, they've won, I think, 5 in a row. They come back 7-0 versus the Houston Astros, hit a grand slam in the 8th inning. They have so much juice, energy. I watch these games because they're West Coast. Yankees are done by then. And I was tuning into the Mariners every night because of the energy they play with. And after that game, the message that Jerry DiPoto sends to the locker room is, we're going to trade, clubhouse favorite, our stud closer, Kendall Graveman, to the team we just beat. It didn't make any sense at all. The locker room was in shambles. Players were crying. Graveman was crying. He didn't want to leave. Mariners haven't made the playoffs in a million years. And to punt that, to do that, and then his promise to the fans is, wait to see what we do. And what they did was they brought in Tyler Anderson, serviceable reliever or starter, 4.3 ERA, not going to move the needle. And Diego Castillo from the Rays, who, he's having a great year, 2.8 ERA, but getting him instead of keeping Graveman, I don't get that at all. Not only do you not keep Graveman, you give him to a division rival. The Astros pummeled them the next 2 games predictably. Mariners, I think right now they're 2.5 back. I don't buy them at all. I think they had some real momentum, and momentum certainly is a thing. You can't argue it's not with a thing like this. And Jerry DiPoto ripped it out of the fan base, of the clubhouse. So I really did not get that at all, especially he kind of promised them an all-in deadline, and getting 2 pitchers, a decent reliever, and a serviceable starter doesn't move the needle for me. So, yeah, we're getting back negative here, Sam. It's been the theme of the show, but those were definitely 2 teams I did not understand what they did at all at the deadline.
Yeah, for my losers, I'm going with the Rockies. Just with Story not being traded, and they also had a guy in John Gray that they could have traded as well. Just to have these ridiculous offers like, oh, we're only going to trade them if we get these prospects. It just shows poor management on their part. And sure, they can extend qualifying offers and get those conditional draft picks. But look, when you have a guy who's not going to resign, especially Story, and he's not coming back, you got to trade him at the deadline, get something for him. And when you realize that you're asking for too much, you just got to be flexible. They showed in the Arenado trade that they're just not the team that is flexible at the deadline but we're not the best at trades. So they're one of my losers. And my other loser, look, some people call it negativity. I just call it being realistic. Not living in fantasy land where we sing Kumbaya. I'm going with the Mets. I'm sorry. They were a loser at this deadline. Look, and the main reason I'm saying that is because, like I said, I think the Baez deal is fine. I just think that, especially it's the DeGrom debacle. That's why I'm putting them as a loser. Just because, they knew that DeGrom was hurt, and, Zach Scott was in over his head, and he didn't try and go get another starting pitcher. And knowing that DeGrom would be out, the fact that you didn't address that need is just, for a team that's trying to win a division and trying to make the playoffs, is just a huge mistake on their part. So I'm sorry. I just think that the Mets, because they didn't add a quality starter, I mean, Rich Hill, say what you will. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but I have to put the Mets as a loser.
Yeah, we don't have quite the time to get into everything about the Mets, and we've already talked plenty about them. But yeah, I understand your point, Mike, surely, with getting a starter or lack thereof. And then, the Seattle Mariners, I have no idea what they're doing. That win against the Astros before they traded Kendall Graveman seemed like a win to really rally around, seemed like a really great win for that team. and it looked like they were on the up, and then they go out and trade him, and things are looking a lot different for them now. So that's why I am pretty confident that the Yankees will at least be able to overtake them in that wild card race. But anyway, quickly, my two is the San Diego Padres, who it's tough to call them losers because they did go out and get Adam Frazier, which was certainly a big piece, a very good hitter. He's had a great year. And then, but the fact that they lost out on Scherzer and then also lost out on Berrios, they really needed a starter. And the fact that they lost out on Scherzer to a team in your own division, a division rival in the Dodgers, that really hurts. And I think that's why, bottom line, they're basically a loser just for that reason alone, even though they did go out and get Adam Frazier, which was a nice piece for them. Daniel Hudson as well, they were able to get for the Padres. So that's all nice pieces, but they really needed a starter and they couldn't get one, which I think is pretty difficult, but certainly puts them in that loser category. And then the Boston Red Sox. I mean, I hate to put this team in here, but Kyle Schwarber is a nice piece, but who knows where he's going to play. They needed a first baseman. Kyle Schwarber is not a first baseman unless it's kind of a Moneyball situation and you put him at first base and teach him how to play there, which maybe they will. I don't think they will. I think he goes to the outfield. That kind of moves everything around, interestingly. So he's going to help the team, but they needed a starter. I really think they did. The starting rotation has been overachieving all year. It's expecting a ton out of Chris Sale to come back and kind of be that ace. If they got another starter, maybe not an ace, but maybe a starter like Kyle Gibson, for example, somebody just kind of bolster up kind of the back end of the rotation. It takes a little bit of pressure off Chris Sale, off of Valdi, off Eduardo Rodriguez as well. So it's tough for me to call these two teams losers because they're not like everything went wrong. They certainly got pieces which will help them, but they didn't do everything that they could have to be a winner.
Yeah. So thanks, Sam, for joining us all throughout the show. Actually, I can't believe we're finally done with baseball, guys. Great conversations. We're almost done with the show, and we're just finishing our first sport. So thank you, Sam, for joining us. Thank you for the headlines. But we're not done just now. We have a ton more to talk about, including an interview with the president of the Bellator, Scott Coker. He's going to get into Saturday's big card, what it's like to run a professional league. So a really good interview there. So make sure, guys, to stay tuned for more one-on-one on 90.7 FM.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Joined now on One by the president of the Bellator, Scott Coker. Scott, we really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Just start off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm here in LA. It's fight week. A lot of killer athletes just arriving into town, getting all their media stuff done, and getting ready for the weight cut, the weigh-ins, and then the big fight on Saturday night.
Yeah, so we'll start with that because some are calling it actually the biggest event in the Bellator history. So Bellator 263, headlined by Patricio Pitbull and Anthony McKee. So just to start off, can you maybe go into how this fight came to be and what is on the line for these two fighters here Saturday?
Well, I can tell you, I'll start with what's on the line because it's a lot of money. And, these guys all have contracts and, we take really good care of them. They make a good living. And this fight, because it's the finals of our 16-man tournament, they get $1 million bonus check. So whoever wins this fight gets the $1 million that night and gets the bragging rights. It's going to be a good night. And it's not like the $1 million is split up. It's goes to one person. The loser really just gets what they normally get for the fight, and that's it. And how we got here is when we looked at our division about 18 months ago, we identified this featherweight division as probably one of our biggest talent pools of athletes, and we had enough to do a 16-man tournament. And initially, they all had a drawing. They drew who they wanted to fight, and kind of like how they ended up in brackets is they all drew like little numbers and that sort of thing. And then Pitbull was the champion, so he kind of got to move people around, had a little trickery on it. But I was sitting there at the drawing, and honestly, I was going, I sure hope AJ versus Pitbull is our finals, right? Because that's the fight that everybody wanted to see. They wanted to see the young gun that's a rising star, and against the guy that's the current champ that's been around. I mean, Pitbull has been the champion since AJ got here in 2014. So that's how long Pitbull's been the reigning, guy. So it took about 4 to 5 years for AJ to get to this point. Now he's ready. Now, he's ready for the biggest fight of his career. But they all got here based on a 16-man tournament, which is going to be the finals on Showtime this Saturday night. And it's $1 million prize money. So there's a lot riding on the line.
You kind of took the words out of my mouth with what you were saying about McKee and Pitbull, because I was watching an interview where you talked about McKee, somebody that you watched fight before he was on a contract. And you said, when he grows professional, I want to sign that guy. And you talk about how he compares to Pitbull, who was dominating in Bellator even before you came there. And I'm just curious, when you look at these two and now they're going off in this massive final, how does that kind of speak to the depth of the promotion, the athletes that you've kind of recruited into it over the years?
Yeah, when I came here, honestly, I remember sitting down with Bob Cook, who was like an advisor for me in Strikeforce. And, Bob is a guy that has been really a good star identifier and talent identifier, let's say. And he said to me, sign this kid over here. And that turned out to be Daniel Cormier. Sign this person over here. That was T Wood. Go sign this girl in LA. That turned out to be Ronda Rousey. I mean, he's probably like, 10-0 with no losses, because he's got an eye for talent like nobody's business. And when I came to Bellator, I said, okay, Bob, what do you think about our roster? And he looked at it. He said, well, you have a lot of work to do. Let's just put it that way. And so, we had Michael Chandler, amazing talent. We had Eddie Alvarez toward the end of his contract. And we had Pitbull, and we had Pitbull's brother. Like, there were some few stars that really shined through. But as far as having an overall roster of, athletes that, you could build divisions, complete divisions on, I would say it was very thin, and it was identified early. And I just basically went back to the Strikeforce model was, okay, let's start buying some free agents, right? Checkbooks got to open. We got to start buying some free agents from the UFC. We signed, I think it was Phil Davis, then Ryan Bader, then Gegard Mousasi. We signed Fedor Emelianenko. We signed, different, top talent that we thought we could, basically throw these main events. And then we started building from the ground up, which I think we're very good at. And we said, okay, let's go sign AJ McKee. Let's go sign Aaron Pico. Let's go sign Taro Fortune. Let's go sign Romero Cotton. And so we started going after like the next generation of fighters. And I really feel that that's important, because you can buy free agents from the top down, but you're not going to build a real company unless you can build from the ground up. And that's where, and then AJ is like the model that when a fighter can come in and he does what he's supposed to do, and he has a proper talent to get to that point. Now, this is the fight that is going to be, a fighter that's come from within and built within the roster, compared to, Pitbull, who's been here before I was even here and had some of the greatest moments, I think, in Bellator history. This is why this fight's so important.
Right. And I really like what you said about building it from the ground up, because I think that's important for any company. I feel like you don't want to kind of jumpstart things, speed up the timeline or anything. So I appreciate that. And just wondering, now looking at the future of the Bellator, past this fight, the rest of 2021 in the future and beyond, what can we expect more events in the future? What is in the cards for the Bellator?
As you guys know, I think we announced the fight with Douglas Lima fighting MVP 2. That'll be in London on October 1st. It'll be live on Showtime. We'll also have a rebroadcast that night in prime time. So we're really excited about that fight, because that's a fight that MVP really wants to avenge. And he told me, he said, I want that fight, and you got to give it to me, because if I can't fight Amosov right now, because Amosov has his wife is pregnant. They're having a kid, and so we're giving him a little time off. MVP didn't want to wait around. He said, "I want to fight. I want to fight." So I said, "Okay, well, let's fight Douglas Lima." And Douglas said, "Let's get it on." And so that's going to be a big fight. Fedor Emelianenko, we're doing our first fight in Moscow. But as you guys probably know, we have a very, very robust Russian roster, lots of talent. And we're going to go to Moscow for the first time. Fedor has 2 fights left with us. This will be one of them. And then we'll do another fight next year with Fedor. And then I think that's going to be his retirement fight. But we have a ton of talent that's from that CIS area and from the Russian territory, including a fighter like Usman Nurmagomedov, who is fighting this Saturday on our card. But if he's healthy and he's not hurt or ready to go, we will fight him October 23rd in Moscow. And then we have, before the end of the year, we have Gegard Mousasi fighting Salter coming up. August 13th, we have Karatana versus Congo, August 20th. And then you'll probably see 2 fights per month with Bellator on Showtime until the end of the year.
So we've mentioned a lot about the depth of talent. We've mentioned some of the upcoming events, and just to hone in on Saturday one more time before we get a little more about you is just what would you encourage people who are watching this fight to look for beyond the main event and some of the other fights that you think are kind of catching your eye?
I'll tell you, when I think about this fight, they're so evenly matched. And what I mean by that is AJ's got a complete game. He can wrestle with you. He could do the jiu-jitsu with you, and he could strike with you. He's got it all. And I feel like Pitbull is the same way. And Pitbull's got a ton of power, as you guys know. The fight that really sticks out of my mind with Pitbull is the fight he fought Daniel Weichel in St. Louis, I want to say 2018. And I thought Pitbull was getting knocked out that night. And then, he's up on the ropes. The fight I thought was getting called. And then he hits Weichel with, I think, a left hook in the right hand and knocks him out. I mean, knocks him out cold. So this guy is never going to be out of the fight. And they're gonna. That's what I'm excited about. Is that this fight is not. There's don't blink, and don't go to the restroom and take a restroom break, because you're gonna want to see this entire fight.
Yeah, and getting more into you now, I'm just curious, picking your brain a little bit here, because running a league, obviously, there's so much that goes into it. And you founded a league in Strikeforce, and I feel like it was a time when maybe MMA wasn't as prominent in the U.S. as it is now. It certainly wasn't a top tier sport. And so what was that process like, getting a league off from the ground running, familiarizing it and with a culture that really wasn't too, fight centric as the US was?
Yeah, it's a good point, because when I first started promoting, I remember reporters coming to me, I mean, mainstream, like, in the Bay Area, like Channel 5 or Channel 11 or the San Francisco Chronicle. And the questions were like this. Well, do you think that, someone's going to die tonight? Is this like human cockfighting? Are you guys, taking advantage of these people? Like, why would you throw these chicken fights, with people? They just had no idea about what MMA was. And in fairness, at that time, really, I think UFC was on Spike TV, and we didn't even have a TV deal when I first started. That Shamrock Gracie fight did not have a TV deal attached to it at all. And Kung Lee's first fight in MMA did not have. We were basically, if you wanted to see that fight, you had to come to the arena. And we had 17,800 something people. I mean, it was an amazing night. And that was the very first fight in the history of California to have a licensed sanctioning MMA fight. But it wasn't like it was on TV like it is today. And that's the difference, is that now people are educated more about what mixed martial arts is. And, my explanation back then to the media was like, guys, you have a misconception about this, because this is martial arts. This is a martial arts contest. And, it's in a cage. So the optics, I understand, is confusing for you, because you're used to seeing things in a ring, like boxing, wrestling, everything combative was usually in a ring. But I said, look, in the Olympics, they allow judo, jiu-jitsu, they allow taekwondo, they allow boxing, they allow wrestling. Basically, 95% of the techniques that you're going to see tonight are already in the Olympics, and they're like, oh, that makes sense to me. The only thing that they had a hard time with was the ground and pound. They just, they had never seen anything like it. But that was a time where it was a transitional moment where It was just now coming on TV. And then when we bought Pro Elite and we got the Showtime and CBS contract back then. And even then, he still was kind of like, a little bit taboo. And now it's grown so much. And I'm so happy to see the success of MMA, because really, to me, it's not just a media content or a fighting content. This is, to me, is the evolution of martial arts, right? You think about martial arts today, competing and fighting, and this is what it is, because this is proven to be the most effective style. Was a melting of different styles to make one your own style. And so to me, that's what this is about. And so to me, that's why I'm happy to see that, people understand that it's not just fighting, is that there's more to it than that. And this is the future. This is not going backwards. You're not going to have, karate guys fight taekwondo guys and kung fu guys fight judo guys. I mean, those days are just not going to happen. It used to happen at one time, but this is proven that it's the most effective fighting art in the world. And, it's the future of MMA, of martial arts. I mean,
you mentioned that martial arts kind of being a blending of styles in a lot of ways. And somebody who kind of embodied that was Bruce Lee, who you mentioned was an inspiration of yours. And I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit more about kind of his approach to the sport and how that's kind of represented in what you do at Bellator today.
Boy, I tell you, when I think about Bruce Lee, I could talk to you for hours about, his philosophy and history. I grew up as a fan. I was already in martial arts. He had passed away already by the time I even learned who he was. And I was already in the martial arts school and, doing my own thing. And he was, in Hong Kong. But it was, what fascinated me over the years was, and you guys are way too young to understand the culture at this time, really was, if you were a Kung Fu guy and I was a Taekwondo guy, you and I didn't talk. You and I didn't train together. You and I, basically, it was like the Kung Fu school, the karate school, the Taekwondo school, the judo school. Everybody was separate, and no one cross-trained. It was taboo. And basically my style was the best style. And what Bruce proved was that, no, your style is not the best style. It's an eclectic blend of different martial arts that work for you that made his system, right? So he created his own system, and he felt everybody should have their own system, even though it was called JKD. But to me, that really got to me, because I'm like, he is in a time where, that was just taboo. You can't go to a Kung Fu instructor and say, your technique style doesn't work. You're going to get your ass kicked in a self-defense situation. Could you imagine that conversation with some Kung Fu master? It just didn't happen. And so I felt like the opening scene of Enter the Dragon, when I look back at it now, he had his MMA shorts, he had his open figure MMA gloves, right? And he grappled. He did some judo. He did some submissions, and then he did striking. So to me, that was in 1973. This film was made in a time where it was style versus style. He showed that a blend of styles is going to be the most effective. And over the last 50 years since that movie was made, that's exactly what happened. And so to me, it just amazes me. And I still read a lot of his philosophy and his books, and it's really fascinating. And it's almost like he was 50. Danny Inosanos actually told me, he goes, I feel like he was probably 100 years ahead of his time. And it's quite a statement, and it's proven to be true.
Yeah, I'm curious if your fighting background, with obviously, your knowledge, and we'll get into more in a second, how your love for MMA growing up, but do you think it plays a role and helps you run the league better, gives you a better understanding of what these fighters going through, just give you more insight?
Yeah, I believe that's been one of the reasons why we've been able to attract free agents. And, my relationship with a lot of these fighters, or even these coaches, like, Javier Mendez, who owns AKA, they had, Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, Luke Rockhold, Kung Lee was training there, Fitch, Koscheck. I mean, they had a huge run. He used to be my martial arts student back in the day. And now he's like, the main owner of one of the greatest gyms in the history of mixed martial arts, right? And he used to fight for me. He was a kickboxer for many years, and a world champion kickboxer, very good kickboxer. But you're talking about the Duke Rufuses of the world, the Mike Winkeljohns of the world in Albuquerque. It's like, these guys, I've known these guys for 30 years, 35 years. So, we have, the relationships I've developed through just teaching, competing, also, being basically a promoter at an early age, really has gotten to the point where a lot of the guys that I was promoting are now trainers, and the door is always open, and the relationships have been very good. And I think that one of the strengths about our company is we really try to treat our fighters in a very good martial arts way, and I think I really learned that through training and working with these guys and kind of knowing their kind of how they're feeling or how they're thinking when they're getting ready for a fight. And when I was working for K1, it was a Japanese kickboxing company for a while, the owner said to me, just keep in mind, it's the fighter that's stepping on the mat. He is the star of the show, and he is the Bushido. He is the warrior. So we must always give them strength to, try to push them up. So, I have a certain philosophy of how we run this company with our athletes, and I think it's been working.
You mentioned kickboxing a couple of times, and the last thing I wanted to ask was about kickboxing, because one of the biggest things that you did for Bellator when you first came and the return to San Jose, where you kind of grew up, was in showing that kickboxing and MMA could share the same stage. How important was that for you when you made the return to San Jose in that event?
Yeah, I mean, it was special because my very first show at that arena in 1994 was a kickboxing show, and it was Javier Mendez from AKA fighting as a main event in that fight. And keep in mind, this is 1 year after the UFC won with Royce Gracie, right? So it was very new. Kickboxing was still, I wouldn't say super popular, but it was on ESPN, and it still did very well for ratings. And that was the very first show. So to bring kickboxing back with MMA, and if you remember, it was with, I believe it was with Glory, with the Glory Kickboxing Night over there with us in San Jose. So it was, Glory was on Spike TV, and we had Bellator on Spike TV. So we did a big event called Dynamite, and that's what you watched. And listen, I still love kickboxing. I think it's fun to watch. I think it's brutal. It's a tough sport, but I think it's still a little bit more popular, say, in Europe in some countries than even MMA is. Right? Like, when we first went to Italy. There was never been an MMA show in Italy before we got there. That was a major, big show like this, right? So in Israel, same thing. In Hungary, same thing. We've been going to countries and spreading the, let's say, the MMA gospel. But to be honest, kickboxing was more popular in those regions than MMA. And over time, we've grown some MMA stars in different territories that never had them before. And I think that now, the territories that we've gone to that we were the first to come now have started to gravitate more towards MMA. And so we're definitely doing our part to help grow the sport worldwide. And I think kickboxing is always going to be here. You're never going to get kickboxing out of Thailand. Believe me, Thailand is like, it's in their culture, it's in their blood. And to me, why can't you do both? Why can't you have fun watching both disciplines? They're both fun to watch.
Yeah. And so I saw somewhere that you said you had 3 choices of a sport growing up: soccer, baseball, and MMA. And I'm just wondering, here as a last question, why MMA? Why was it the sport that you fell in love with? Why?
I'll tell you, it wasn't even MMA at that time. I was living in Korea. My mom is Korean. My father is American. He grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he went to the military. He lived in Asia for 2 years as a soldier, and then he stayed 16 years in the import-export business. So he chose to stay there and raised my mom. And we have 3. I have 2 siblings, so 3 boys, and we're going to elementary school, right? So we're going to elementary school now, and the choices were basically like, okay, you have to do PE. So as your PE class, which one do you want to do? Just like in the US, right? What do you want to do? You want to go play this? You want to do that? But it was Taekwondo because it was a Korean system, right? And I was living in Korea at the time. It was basically, do you want to do Taekwondo, right? Soccer or baseball? And I didn't know much about Taekwondo. I just thought, let me try that. And that really has been something that really has been a game changer for me, because from that moment on, man, I just fell in love with it. I just fell in love with martial arts, and I just, it's been a lifelong journey, and feel really fortunate to have been in this industry and, been around a long time, and continue to have the passion and the, excitement to go to work every day. And it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome to hear. You always love to hear people that have such a passion, and to see you put it on full display in front of everyone. It's really admirable. So Scott Coker, president of the Bellator, we really do appreciate you spending the time with us today. Stick around, everyone, for more one-on-one on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
We're back here on more one-on-one, our last segment of the night. And believe it or not, Mike, this isn't just a baseball show. It's a sports talk show. So we're going to end with some NBA. And it was a very busy week in the NBA. There was the NBA draft, and then there was a huge trade. We'll get into the trade first. The Lakers are getting Russell Westbrook to be their number 3, or we'll see about that. But they're getting Russell Westbrook along with 2 second-rounders, Montrezl Harrell, who really never found his footing in LA, Kyle Kuzma, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So it's a big move. The Wizards, they plan to keep Beal, create some roster flexibility. That does that. Westbrook is on the books for some big money, $44 million this year, $47 million the next. It's his 4th team in 4 years. But before we get into all that, I just want to ask your initial thoughts on Russell Westbrook joining LeBron James and Anthony Davis with the Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, before we break down the specifics of the trade and, any of that, just thinking about LeBron and Russ, at first, I was a little, my initial reaction was that, I wonder if, because when you think of LeBron, you think of a physical guy who's somewhat like a point guard, has to have the ball in his hands, etc. And you think about Russ, who's very similar, has to have the ball in his hands, do that kind of play. And, I wonder if those two styles can gel. But at the same time, we had those same kind of thoughts of, can LeBron and AD play together? And obviously they can. So I think it can work. At first, I was concerned, but knowing that also, they've, take this as you will, grain of salt, but they played together on All-Star games. Like they've had in some non-actual NBA games played together. Oh, they're friends. At least they have a friendship that lasts as well. But I think it could work.
Yeah, I'll start with the one thing I think is positive, because I guess that's been the theme of the show, negative, harping on different stuff. The one thing is positive is that Westbrook offers a playmaking option for when LeBron, who, at his age, he can't play 82 full out and be the primary ball handler every single game. He just can't. So Westbrook will provide nice relief in that, nice rest for LeBron. The issue is Westbrook is a terrible fit with LeBron and AD. I get the point you just said, because AD and LeBron certainly were a questionable fit, right? LeBron's always been best with, high perimeter shooters, stuff like that. And Westbrook isn't that. I could hamper at his inefficiency all day. I'll just go with this stat. Out of 70 players with at least 2,000 jump shots the last 5 years, Westbrook's dead last with efficient field goal percentage of 31.8% on 4,000 plus shots. So he's just not an efficient player. We've seen with age, as his athleticism deteriorates, he's just not the same guy. I loved Russ in OKC, gets a ton of hate now. It's probably too far. The pendulum's probably swung too far, but he's just not a great fit. He's going to put up the numbers. We do know that. 22, he averaged triple-double last year, 22, 12 and 12 pretty much on a not great Wizards team. But the issue is just with this roster now, they're really strung for cap here. You look at it, I'm wondering what they go next, because Westbrook on the books for $44 million. They included Harrell in that trade after accepting his player option just to match the salaries. They have the 9.8, I think, mid-level exception. They have 10 of their own free agents, including Caruso, Markieff Morris, Dennis Schroeder, Taylor Horton Tucker, and then the vet min. So they don't have much room here to grow. I think you could see some sign-in trades. They'll have to get really creative. They'll have to get some vets that buy into LeBron and sign for cheap. But overall, you are locked into this core. I think it's for sure. There are questions about how he fits. Where do you see, Mike, the Lakers pivoting from here with not many resources to try to go out there and make a big move?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of the cap situation, obviously it's tight. I mean, you mentioned they have a lot of their own free agents to sign. And I mean, look, you would love for a guy like Caruso to come back. I think he should come back. As far as like Dennis Schroeder, I mean, he is not coming back. I don't think, I don't know if him and LeBron got along super great. I do know that Schroeder had a very poor playoffs. Obviously, he was injured for part of the season, but I mean, a lot of that meme floating around of the Hangzhou Tigers with Shaq. I mean, it was used a lot with Schroeder in the playoffs. I mean, he was never coming back. Russ is the guy they're replacing with him. I think he kind of underperformed anyway. I mean, in terms of you need shooters around LeBron and you need shooters around Russ too. I mean, it's undeniable. Obviously, I think the Russ thing, my initial reaction was, I don't really know that this can work. As I've sat on it, like I said, I think it can. I think it's also important to note before I talk about some shooters they can get, initially it was reported they were going after Buddy Hield and a trade for Buddy Hield was all set up. I think that might've been a better fit. Obviously not as big of a name, but that's more of a traditional point guard who can kind of facilitate more. Cause say what because it has been levied against West that, he's kind of like he inflates his numbers, he's a little more about himself than the team. Like it's about him getting the triple double versus getting the win. So I don't really know how someone can feel about that. Also, there was talk of like Chris Paul. I mean, who knows, first off, if he's not going to accept his player option to go back with the Suns. But of course, him and LeBron are best friends. I think that would have made more sense. Obviously, Chris is older, but like LeBron, he showed even more so than LeBron, I think, in recent years, he's shown the age doesn't define Paul CP3. I mean, what he did with the Suns, what he did with OKC last year. I mean, he still has it. I think that would have been maybe a better fit. But looking at getting a shooter around those two, I mean, you mentioned it before, first off with Westbrook. I mean, he shot 43% from the field this year, 31% from three. Like that's not a shooter. I mean, the question is, JJ Redick is available. Is he a guy, he's a veteran, he's looking for a ring. Is he someone that would maybe take less to come here? He's potentially an option. I mean, there are bigger names who are shooters out there. I mean, Duncan Robinson, Tim Hardaway Jr., who I'm personally not a huge fan of because of his Knicks days. But I mean, those are options. But that being said, like, first of all, Hardaway isn't restricted, but Duncan is. I mean, also they're going to want a lot of money. That's not really going to fit. So maybe a sign and trade, or I don't also really know how much they're going to want to come and play with LeBron because LeBron isn't. I mean, LeBron's still a great player. I'm not going to deny. I also think he was still pretty hurt with that high ankle sprain. But that being said, like he's not the LeBron of 2012, even 2016. Like he's not the same guy. So I still think players want to play with him, but who knows how much. So I think after this move, I think it's important for the Lakers to pivot, find a shooter, whether that's a veteran they can get for cheap, like Redick, maybe. I also know Redick wants to be closer to his family. There was that whole thing with Philly and to go end up in Dallas and all that. So, who knows with that. But yeah, I'm very interested in what happens with the Lakers this year. My question is though, are the Lakers one of the teams to beat now in the West? Because I know you said you're not a huge fan of the deal, but think about the other teams out there right now. I mean, you got Phoenix, who's coming off of a poor playoff, finals appearance. They were great up until that point, but then they kind of choked in the finals. You got the Clippers who, I mean, Kawhi might not even be back. The Mavs are kind of like a wishy-washy team. I mean, I don't really know. Like, where do you see, Dame, who knows if he's going to still be around? Where do you see the Lakers not kind of lining up in the West?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because that was my next thing. The West is completely wide open. Yeah. It really is. But here is for the Lakers, first of all, right now they have 5 players under contract. That's it. LeBron, AD, Russ, Marc Gasol, and Alfonso McKinney. So you have some serious work to do this offseason. Here's where I could see, I looked into it a little bit, just curious. I love, playing GM, fantasy, whatever. I love doing it. So they have 10 of their own free agents. You have bird rights on a lot of them. That means you can go over the cap to bring them back. You do so with Caruso, Markieff Morris, Taylor Horton Tucker is restricted, and Wes Matthews. I think you bring all those guys back, no question. Nice depth, nice perimeter shooting from Wes, everything like that, no question about that. Then I think you have to get really creative, and that could be with the Dennis Schroeder sign and trade, which is plausible if you get a guy that's willing to take a little bit less to come to the Lakers, like a DeMar DeRozan, like a Lowry, like a Dinwiddie. Not sure they're the greatest basketball fits. I think Dinwiddie would be really fascinating. I'd love to see that. So if they could maybe figure something out, a 3-team sign and trade with the Nets and someone else, offload these contracts. I'm sure the Nets are in a similar spot there. Get a worse team to take on salary, give them assets, stuff like that. They have to get creative. In that sense, you bring your own guys back. Then you have the mid-level exception. Use that on guys like who maybe aren't glamorous, but are certainly viable role players, like maybe an Alec Burks, who we saw at the Knicks last year, lit it up game 1 versus the Hawks, bucket off the bench of Patty Mills, Otto Porter. Try to hope that they'll take less, try to fill up that minimum with 2 or 3 guys, fill out those nice role players. And then you have the vet minimums, maybe a guy like JJ Redick, although I think he'd be a little out of their price range. That'd be a perfect fit. And you hope that you can get 2 or 3 vets that are ring chasing. And I think that's how you rebuild the Lakers to where you can survive this Westbrook deal, because you talked about it. The West is really wide open. Clippers, we don't know what they're going to be. We don't know Kawhi, if he's even going to stay. Probably will. We don't know the knee injury. A lot of questions there. And so then you look at it, the Suns, there's no guarantee they'll be back. There really isn't. They had a lot go to them. Utah is still really inexperienced. At the end of the day, you have LeBron James and you have Anthony Davis, who've won a title together. LeBron obviously knows how to win. That on its own might just will them to a finals appearance. After that, you look at the Nets. That'd be a fascinating matchup. So many storylines. Russ versus KD, LeBron, Kyrie, all the clashing there. I think that's what, as a fan, we root for. Obviously, we root for the Knicks, but I think that's where you go there. So just, that's to end that discussion. And speaking of the Knicks, with 5 minutes or so here, we're going to get into the draft just a little bit. It was the same night. It was after the Westbrook trade. It set things up nicely. Nice basketball talk. And the Knicks had a really interesting draft because they go in with 19 and 21. They get the Dallas first-round pick for Porzingis. They've talked about flexibility this whole time, and they did something really smart. They traded down not once but twice. They first traded down from 19. They grabbed the Hornets future first-round pick, ton of projections and whatever, but those are future assets. If a star gets disgruntled or whatever, they will have those assets. They won't be locked into a player. Then for 21, they traded down to 25, grabbed another second, and with 25, they made their first pick. They got Quentin Grimes, guard out of Houston. We'll go quick here because there's a ton of moves to get to, but he's a really good defender, 40% from 3. He certainly is battle-tested playing for Sampson in Houston. Do you like his fit, Mike, in the Thibodeau system?
Yeah, he's a well-rounded offensive player. He's apparently a great locker room guy. He's not going to be a starter, obviously. If anything, his rookie year, he'll be a good rotational player. I think he's obviously a hard-nosed player, which Tibbs loves. I think it's good. I think, you talk about the trade back. I'm kind of neutral on that move. I think, look, they got their guy. I think Grimes was the guy apparently wanted all along. It was just kind of a reach at 19 or 21, but at 25, it made sense. But the Knicks' history of poor drafting, how much more sense does it make to really get another draft pick in the future? Because they're not exactly known to capitalize on draft picks. Maybe it would have made more sense to just kind of stay where they were. But the fact that it's a future first rounder that could be a chip in the future for trading for a guy or something like that. So I'm not going to knock the move. I'm kind of neutral. I think overall, Grimes is good. I think McBride is good at what they got at 36. Yeah. I think overall, given where they were in the draft, I think, what the Knicks really have to do is capitalize on free agency. But draft-wise, I think they did fine. I'm not really passionate one way or the other. I think it was a solid draft.
For sure. And you talked about, they're not great history, but Leon Rose, this is a new Knicks regime. And in Leon, we trust. I think that's pretty popular among Knicks fans. I do generally trust him. Emmanuel Quickley was a reach for many last year. Remember, he got the D+ grade from CBS, and he never lived that down. Definitely a great pick there. Obi, not so much, but whatever. Then, just quickly here, they have 32. They trade that for 34, 36. They get a draft and stash, Rokas Jokubaitis. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Draft and stash, playing in the Spanish league, not much there. Then you talked about Miles Deuce McBride. That's a guy I love. He was the closer at West Virginia, 6'8" wingspan, 41% from 3, and he's only assisted on 58% of those. So he can create his own shot, which fits really well on this roster. You don't have many guys that can do that. He fits really well alongside Quickly if they're able to get a rapport. And with his lateral quickness, he's able to keep up with the Trae Young on the defensive end, which really plagued them in the playoffs. They did not have someone there. And then moving on quickly, we'll just go over the Nets. And they had 2 first-round picks. I'll just go to the second really quick because they got Duron Sharp, not much to him, just an offensive rebounder machine, led the nation in offensive rebounding percentage. But their first pick was my favorite pick of the draft, Cam Thomas out of LSU, 27th, a natural scorer. He's a really good ISO player, and there's no one better to learn from in isolation basketball than Harden, Kyrie, and Kyrie. So I think that's a really good fit, and he could be a really nice piece in that second unit.
Yeah, I mean, we're up against it, but all I'll say is, it's been talked that, Thomas is the second best pure shooter in the draft. I mean, obviously, he went more towards the back of the first round, but I mean, look, he's a solid player. The Nets' offensive shooting isn't really one of their needs. We would have thought maybe go for some defense, which is really more what they need. But hey, I'm not going to knock the pick. If he's that good of a shooter, he's obviously going to help.
Yeah, and I love the move for Sharp at 29 because the Nets aren't trying to get these crazy high ceiling guys. You know what he's going to do. He's going to offensive rebound. It's a unique skill set, an isolated skill set, and they're so good. That's really all they need. I think when you look at these good teams, they don't need to go for the high ceiling guys. Just go for the guys with guaranteed floors. That's what the Nets did with these first 2-round picks. So I'm really a fan of that. Overall, the one criticism I have for the draft is it's so unorganized and complicated to keep up with picks. With all the trades, they can't announce it, unlike the NFL. So you have no clue who's picking. I was celebrating picks for the Knicks, guys that they traded 20 minutes ago because I wasn't on Twitter. So that was just a real big grievance of mine. I think the NBA really does need to clean that up in the future for a better watching experience. But yeah, as you mentioned, we're up against the time. And so, Mike, I think that's finally going to wrap up the show. It flew by in my eyes. So special thanks to our guests, Marc Mellon and Scott Coker, for taking the time with us. If you missed any part of our show, you can check out the highlights or the whole show on YouTube or WFUVsports.org. The sports director at WFUV is Bobby Ciaffrini. And thanks to our great producer, Alex Wolves, Sam Davis for the headlines, and my partner tonight, Michael Leegan. I'm Ryan Gregware. Enjoy the rest of your night. Sleep tight. And as always, One on One is a production of WFUV Sports.